thing that the will of the people put forward. And there's actually a study that proves this, that shows that in every example of the people's will, it doesn't matter because it's not up to the people. James, can you talk about what this study is and what it shows?
So you've got Martin Gillen's Benjamin Page come out in 2014. They get, it's an elaborate and beautiful study. They gathered tons of data. I think going back to the 50s, they haven't released their work on the older data. But the recent data shows that if the vast majority of Americans support a policy proposal, or if the vast majority of Americans dislike a policy proposal, that policy proposal has the exact same chance of passing. So what it says is if Americans really like it, or if they really hate it, it's still got about a 30% chance of passing. And the opposite is true if we look at elites or special interests. So if elites or special interests really hate a policy proposal, it's really unlikely that proposal is going to pass. And if they really like it, it gets up to about 60% that it's going to pass. So what it's basically saying is it's easier to kill legislation than it is to pass it, but it's also saying that elites have much more, they find much more response to their policy suggestions or policy preferences than the vast majority of Americans. Interestingly, though, this is something that I looked at a while ago and presented in my research. I would say that Gillen's and Page's data probably doesn't change over time. So I don't suspect that this is something that changes in 1970. I suspect that we're going to see those numbers be pretty flat right through the 50s. And if we're talking about a policy proposal that Americans are knowledgeable of, those are actually the policy proposals that lobbyists don't do a lot of work on. It's as soon as and believe me, they're polling as well. So lobbyists are very aware when citizens don't know about a tax reform piece or something that's going to change taxation. As soon as it's not in the public sight, that's where you're going to see the most lobbyists on. And there's been congressmen who have said this. So the least amount of public attention, the more lobbyists you get. All right? And we're talking the American public's only going to know about 4 or 5 policy changes per year. And so when we're doing thousands upon thousands, the lobbyists are going to attack all of those. And we've had the tax reform in '86, and we just had the recent one in, was it 2017? In between those two, there's been over 20,000 changes to our tax code. None of that gets covered in the newspaper. None of that's going to make the big press. But the lobbyists are there on all of those. And the pressures that politicians feel are going to be on all of those, but only from the wealthy or the big groups that have a lot of power.
And it makes perfect sense why these numbers have remained static, because it's not saying how it changed with transparency or the weaponization of transparency. This is just saying this is the system that we have. We don't live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy. Here's the data that proves this. So what the Transparency Initiative has done is just simply weaponize that system. I mean, it's made us think that we are free.
I think what it says more than anything is that Americans mostly don't know most of the policies. And even when they know something, I don't think they're very familiar with the ins and outs of it. So if you talk about the Dodd-Frank, go talk to people about the Dodd-Frank legislation on the street, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, they did something to the banks, right? I'm for it. And they're not going to know anything about the thousands of lines in there. The elites who are going to be affected by Dodd-Frank, of course, are going to know a lot more about it. And so we'd love to think that the American public is following legislation and they're understanding legislation. We just don't see that at all. We'd love to think that lobbyists aren't following legislation and they aren't the ones benefiting transparency, but that's precisely what we see.
With the initiation of transparency has made people more placated into thinking that they have more power over time.
Correct, absolutely. So with 200 floor votes a year, we don't find any citizens following the 200 floor votes. So already back in the 60s, they were talking about how little people followed votes. So even congressional scholars will tell you they don't follow 200 votes a year. They don't even follow 40 votes a year. Likely you don't follow 40 votes a year. I've never met anyone who follows 40 votes a year. They increased that number in 1970 to thousands of votes per year. You're talking millions and millions of pages just of hearings and legislation just to decipher one vote.
And let's talk about bills, because you made an obvious but very astute point. I mean, the Bill of Rights was how many pages?
Right. The Bill of Rights, the one that I have, fits on one page.
So, I mean, the bills today are stunningly enormous. I mean, thousands of pages, a lot of them are written directly by these lobbyists. And how does that fit into the special interest versus constituent? Like, let's say I want to be engaged politically.
Even back in the 70s, I would say it's impossible to follow legislation as a constituent. So you really have to trust your legislator. And your legislator can't follow all legislation. So what they're going to do is, if they're going to read something back in the 70s and they don't understand it, guess how they're going to vote? Hell no. Because I've got no pressures to vote on something stupid, right? I can't read it. It makes no sense to me. No one knocked on my door and talked to me about it. I'm not going to vote for it. Now, if I hand you something that's 1,000 pages back in 1970, you're just going to be like, give me a break. I didn't even have time to read it. How am I going to vote for this? But as soon as you can watch how people vote, and as soon as my pressure is, say, you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat, and I see all the Republicans voting for it, if I vote for it, I might get called out by my press anyways, right? Oh, he's siding with the Republicans. I don't even have to read it. I almost immediately, knee-jerk reaction, I have to vote against what you guys are voting. So we get this immediate partisanship. But I've also got pressures from the lobbyists to vote for it. And therefore, you could get legislation through that no one understands. And when I say no one but the particular special interest. So complexity rises, page length rises. The bigger the bill is, the easier it is to insert these lines that'll make everyone fall asleep.
Yeah, constituents are busy figuring out, how does this affect me? What does it disadvantage my community? These thousands of pages, the special interest says, boom, this is
right.
For or against
Insert this obscure paragraph. So again, if the citizens can't understand it, boy, they stand a great chance. If people can understand it, well, it gets a little tougher.
The National Rifle Association, the lobbying arm of the gun manufacturing industry, is in the spotlight for its influence in Washington in the midst of an epidemic of mass shootings. The NRA's investments to defeat gun reform, which is favored by most Americans, reached $84 million in the 2016 election alone. Right-wing Florida Senator Marco Rubio was personally confronted by survivors of the Parkland school massacre about his gifts from the NRA.
So, Senator Rubio, can you tell me right now that you will not accept a single donation from the NRA in the future?
No, the answer to the question is that people buy into my agenda. And I do support the Second Amendment, and I also support the right of you and everyone here to be able to go to school and be safe. And that's why I support the things that I have stood for and fought for during my time there.
NRA money? More NRA money?
The influence of these groups comes not from money. The influence comes from the millions of people that agree with the agenda. Our goal here is to move forward.
Wait, so hold on. So right now, in the name of 17 people, you cannot ask the NRA to keep their money out of your campaign?
I think in the name of 17 people, I can pledge to you that I will support any law that will prevent a killer like this.
No, but I'm talking NRA money.
No.
But how lobbyists influence politicians is not always as clear and direct. In Marco Rubio's case, he's only received about $5,000 in direct contributions from the NRA. But they spent over $1 million on his re-election campaign. They also use different forms of intimidation against pro-gun reform politicians. James D'Angelo further explains how these lobbying strategies work.
So surely it comes down to just electing the uncorruptible, right?
No. We don't find much evidence that they're corrupt. The way money's used, and this is all the dark money, most of the public money, and almost all of the campaign financing is used to intimidate. Almost all of the dark money is used for advertising. And almost all the advertising is negative advertising. And so if Abby, for example, starts voting against my initiatives, we're going to start taking out negative advertising against her. Now, if you don't change your views, that actually doesn't bother us that much. It terrifies everybody else who might be voting. But If we do that on a fairly consistent basis, and the NRA does that on a fairly consistent basis, everybody knows that if they vote against the NRA, they're going to find tons of ads in their district. And the ads aren't going to be about guns. They're going to be on whatever would take this person out. So when Joe Manchin stepped up against the NRA, when the approval rating for tougher gun laws in the US was over 90%, when he proposed some soft gun legislation, the NRA started taking out millions of dollars of ads against him. None of the ads were about guns.
I mean, I guess it's going out on a limb to say that these people are not corrupted, because let's say, just best case scenario, everyone's joining the legislative body wanting to do good. At a certain point, they know that to keep that position, they have to keep taking the money from their corporate donors because I mean, that's the sheer cost of running and maintaining your position in government. So I don't see how the bribery isn't a thing.
It's much easier for me to start funding this guy over here who's got a long history for voting for the tobacco companies, and fund him and then try and take you out with a ton of negative ads and go after you on every level possible. And it's much cheaper than bribery, because if I pay you for a vote today, are you going to ask for more money tomorrow? Of course you will. But if I get someone who's always voted for some lunatic policy that I like, and I get them in office, I'm not going to have to pay him each time.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, just today we have the sheer amount of spending on campaigns has skyrocketed so much just over the last 10 years, where you have the Democratic Party actually making candidates do Rolodex tests, where you have to prove that you can raise 250 grand through the contacts on your phone in order to even be backed by the party institution.
Right.
So I guess what I'm saying is, it almost seems like self-sabotage, because all of the people in their Rolodexes are obviously going to be tied to the special interest, to the corporation. So it's almost like you're shooting yourself in the foot before you even get into office.
It could be. I mean, we certainly could expect some of that. Intimidation's baked in. But if you look at Lawrence Lessig or Zephyr Teachout, who are talking about corruption, in both of their books, full books on corruption, they don't mention intimidation. It's all bribery. Humans are great at intimidation. You vote with me on this, or we talk later. That's legal, right? And everybody knows what that means. Or the NRA, after taking Deborah Maggart out in Tennessee or going after Joe Manchin, doesn't say anything. They just tell you they're watching your votes. That's all they say. That's legal, right? And if they tell you they're watching your votes, what does that mean? It means if you vote against them, you're going to have in your district, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of ads against you. Intimidation is the currency of the realm. Bribery is its orphan stepsister.
Lastly, I mean, in a system where people truly did have the power, that they were able to democratize themselves and actually hold power to account, let's say not living in an oligarchy where corporations control everything, not living in this kind of inevitability of capitalism where we see where we are today, wouldn't transparency work then if we actually could function as the democracy that we are all conditioned to believe?
A liquid democracy where everybody's voting on everything? I mean, the Greeks tried that. It's pretty hazardous, right? California is very good at trying that. We do a lot of referendums here in California, right?
I hear what you're saying. I just think that we've gotten to a point today where I don't think closing off transparency in the legislature is the end-all be-all of the solution. I think that there's a bigger system at play, which is global capitalism. And
I think you're right. I mean, I think this isn't the answer to everything. This doesn't solve everything. In fact, what I'm doing in Uganda right now is because this doesn't solve everything, what am I looking at? And I actually look at, there's one thing, it's shocking that no one's measured this, but we're trying to measure this. And we're trying to measure just the median net worth of legislators. The median net worth compared to the median net worth of the citizens. And those numbers are always different, right? So the median net worth of the legislators in most developing countries is going to be 1,000 times higher than the median net worth of citizens. This is not a transparency or, you know, legislative transparency issue. This is we're electing the elites, and somehow the elites are getting into office, and we're not even measuring that. And we suspect that just by measuring it, we're going to change how we talk about democracy, right? The fact that we don't know these numbers in Canada, We don't know them in Brazil. We don't know it in Mexico, France, Sweden, Spain, none of these countries. We have these numbers. But in many of these developing countries, the difference is over 1,000, we suspect, and the legislatures are completely made up of the richest people in the country. Well, I can tell you exactly how the legislation is going to go if you get that. This isn't a transparency legislative issue. It's we're electing aristocrats.
Un canto por la América Unida. Mira, que lo escuchan allá arriba. ¡Vamos! Somos la tierra, somos la arcilla, la esperanza que brota y germina. 500 años nos han pisoteado, aquí seguimos, de aquí no nos vamos. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta, unido que no calla. América, América, lindísimo continente se levanta, unido que no calla. Pueblo latino, vamos para adelante, tumbando fronteras, somos gigantes, nadie se rinde, vamos para arriba, esa tierra es tuya y también es mía. Pueblo mestizo, guerrero y solidario, aquí nadie es extraño, aquí somos hermanos. Todos los países digan presente, Venezuela y Cuba presente, Nicaragua, Honduras presente, el Caribe entero. América, América, continente se levanta, pueblo unido que no calla, no se detiene. América, continente se levanta, pueblo unido que no calla.
Soy Tupacatari, soy hueca y puro, 5 siglos resistiendo el atropello y el abuso. El Avia Yala reflorece junto al alba, sigue un solo continente porque rayos no separa. Con Sucre y Bolívar seguimos pa'lante, pa' encima latino, no hay visa que nos pare.
Desde la Patagonia hasta el Río Bravo, los latinos levantamos la mano. América, lindísimo continente se levanta, unido que no calla. América, lindísimo continente se levanta, unido que no calla. México y Bolivia, presente. Puerto Rico libre, presente. Todo el continente, presente. Latino.
El mundo se mueve constantemente y todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos. Se mueve la geopolítica mundial. Nos preguntamos qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento, cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan. Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR.
Siempre tuve la certeza de que estaba en algún lugar del mundo y estaba cerca. Estaba cerca. Mi marido quería tener 5 hijas mujeres. Yo nunca lo contrarié porque a mí me gustaban también muchos chicos, por algo era maestra. Bueno, la primera hija fue Laura, que nació el 21 de febrero de 1955 y era una hija muy esperada.
Bueno, con mi hermana de chiquititas nos peleamos muchísimo porque ella era 2 años y medio más grande que yo y éramos como 2 opuestos. Era una batalla campal. Sorpresivamente nos encontramos las dos en lo mismo, de golpe pensando y sintiendo lo mismo y peronistas en un hogar antiperonista. Hay una anécdota muy divertida que era que cuando lo queríamos hacer enojar a mi papá, con mi hermana le cantábamos la marcha peronista y mi papá se ponía furioso porque a él no le gustaba para nada, ¿no? Y mi mamá lo trataba de tranquilizar, le decía, no, Guido, mirá. Mamá además era una mujer que no quería conflicto. Ella hacía cualquier cosa con tal de que la confrontación no exista.
En el caso particular de Laura, la mayor, ella tuvo en la secundaria profesoras muy esclarecidas, que les hacían ver la historia de otra manera, los hacían pensar, los hacían rebelarse, ¿no? Y ya en la secundaria, ya Laura tenía un liderazgo así de militancia. Después pasó a ser parte de Montoneros. Mi marido era mucho más moderno, más también rebelde, y yo era más conformista. Yo siempre cuento que cuando teníamos miedo que Laura fuera detenida y le decíamos, mira, vos venís llorando, que tal compañero tuyo no volvió y que te contaron tal cosa. Mis maestras también veían y venían, y yo también. Y digo, Laurita, te tenés que ir, con papá te estamos preparando todo para que salgas del país. No me voy a ir, no, si me sacan es dormida, cuando me despierte vuelvo, pero te van a matar, le digo, Laura, te van a matar. Mira, mamá, yo tengo un compromiso en mi país y nadie quiere morir. Todos tenemos un proyecto de vida, pero sabemos que miles de nosotros vamos a morir y nuestra muerte no va a ser en vano. Eso para mí fue como el sello de su decisión, de su valentía y de mi rol, de no decirle más nunca, no hagas, no vayas, no pienses, sino protegerla de la mejor manera, pero respetándola.
Se comunica a la población que a partir de la fecha el país se encuentra bajo el control operacional de la Junta Militar. Se recomienda a todos los habitantes el estricto acatamiento a las disposiciones y directivas que emanen de autoridad militar, de seguridad o policial, así como extremar el cuidado en evitar acciones y actitudes individuales o de grupo que puedan exigir la intervención drástica del personal en operaciones. Firmado Jorge Rafael Videla, Teniente General, Comandante General del Ejército.
La última vez que yo vi a mi hermana fue el 31 de julio de 1977. Había una pelea, la pelea de Monzón, estaba peleando en ese momento. Nosotros aprovechamos esa circunstancia para encontrarnos.
Y regresamos juntos con ella. La dejamos en La Plata, donde dijo, déjenme acá. No sabíamos dónde vivía. Y chao, esa fue la última vez que la vi.
Desde entonces estoy buscando a mi nieto. Por gente liberada, he sabido que es un varón. Hace poco ha cumplido 6 años. Alguien lo tiene. Alguien lo está criando. Alguien lo robó. Alguien se lo quitó a mi hija a las 5 horas de nacer. Y lo tuvo con esposas en sus manos. Indefensa, en el momento más sublime de una madre. Indefensa y atada, engrillada, despojada.
Ella es una mujer que ya no teme, con un carácter mucho más fuerte, más aguerrida, y con mucha decisión y mucho más coraje del que la dejé. Cuando yo me voy a la clandestinidad y dejo de tener el contacto con mi mamá, dejo a una mujer. Y cuando la vuelvo a ver es otra.
Carroña piñada, los nudos de otra madera apuran chispas hirientes y encienden lumbres de ojeras. Cargando en ancas los hombros se van quedando los años. No se han cerrado las puertas ni las heridas de antaño. Yo estudié cerca de Colonia San Miguel, en la escuela número 27, Patricias de Argentina, una escuela rural. En esa escuela éramos 7 alumnos en total, en la matrícula total, entre todos los grados. Tal es así que cuando egresamos 3, que éramos Antonio, Adrián y yo, que éramos los 3 que estábamos en el mismo grado, que hicimos los 7 años de la escuela, la cerraron por falta de matrícula. Hay un lugar acá cerca que se llama el Club Independiente. En ese Club Independiente fue donde yo escuché música por primera vez. Y era la época en que estaban ingresando los teclados Casio de Argentina, ¿viste? Y habían 2 teclados, 2 guitarras, Y yo cuando lo escuché que era era la Sinfónica de Londres, ¿viste? No podía creer lo que estaba escuchando. Y a partir de ahí como que sentí que había algo que iba a formar parte de mi vida. Y bueno, y me mandaron justamente con uno de los que tocaba el teclado, con Omar Martel.
Viste que por costumbre los chicos tienen eso de ir a un baile y ponerse a correr alrededor de la gente que baila, o salir afuera, ¿no? Y de repente él no, era un chico que venía y te quería comer con la mirada cuando estabas tocando la música, ¿no? Y bueno, se quedaba mirando como tocábamos nosotros.
Y él me dio mis primeras lecciones. Yo iba 2 veces por semana a su casa y tenía que hacerlo en bicicleta, pues no podíamos hacerlo de otra manera. Entonces eran unos cuantos kilómetros en bici, cerca de 15 de ida y 15 de vuelta para tomar esa clase, ¿no?
Y siempre, digamos, cuando le estaba dando clase, él siempre iba un poquito más adelante, ¿no?, de lo que yo le enseñaba. Por eso yo siempre decía, tenía mi sospecha de que él tenía algo ya dentro de él que lo lo enseñaba.
Fantasma viejo y roído, el capullo de los rosarios cuando se postran las sombras. Siempre que me preguntaban antes de dónde venía la historia de la música, yo me tenía que inventar una historia que ahora no me acuerdo, pero era como bueno, ¿viste? Como armar una movida para... Bueno, ahora sí también que tiene que ver con una cuestión familiar, ¿no? Porque con la resolución de encontrar el cotejo de ADN mío con el de Laura, también se pudo saber quién era mi papá, que hasta eso en el momento nadie lo sabía. Y ahora lo entiendo, que en realidad tenía que ver con mis abuelos que escuchaban esa música, y con mi papá, y viste, como toda una cuestión que se fue, de alguna manera se fue transmitiendo. En mi cumpleaños, 36, que fue un cumpleaños que no festejé porque cayó lunes y no sé qué pasó, bueno, esas cosas mágicas, mi mujer viene y me dice que se había enterado de una muy buena fuente que, bueno, dice, bueno, sos hijo de tus padres, vos sos adoptado. Y bueno, y ahí se activó todo lo que sabía, que era entender que siendo nacido en el 78 y no sabiendo quiénes eran tus padres, existe esa posibilidad de poder ser un hijo apropiado. Y yo cuando me enfrenté con mis viejos adoptivos y les pregunté, yo ya sabía la respuesta, pero evidentemente hay como una cosa de decir, bueno, porque mucho dependía de eso que me dijeron. Porque si ellos me negaban la verdad, eso implicaba para mí un retroceso y tener que salir a buscar por otro lado. Afortunadamente ellos me dijeron todo lo que sabían y eso ayudó mucho a la investigación, a la búsqueda. A mí me ayudó mucho también. Pero ese sí fue un momento difícil. Eso fue uno de los días más difíciles de mi vida. Ahí empezó esta parte que es la historia mía pública.
Periodístico del día, Estela de Carlotto, titular de Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, recuperó a su nieto tras 37 años de búsqueda. Fue recuperado el nieto de Estela de Carlotto.
Pero sí, mi querido, un nieto más, y el nieto de Estela es esa lucha maravillosa de las abuelas, esperanzadora, porque buscan desaparecidos con vida. Pero realmente es un día histórico, chicos, histórico.
Él me buscó, se cumplió aquello que decíamos las abuelas. Ellos nos van a buscar como nosotros los seguimos buscando. Esto es para los que todavía dicen basta. Esto es para los que todavía dudan si hacemos bien. Esto es para aquellos que pretenden que olvidemos, que demos vuelta a la página, como si nada hubiera pasado. Fue el 5 de agosto del año pasado, cuando la doctora Servini de Cubría me llama por teléfono. Era un llamado dramático de la urgencia. Llegué ahí inocentemente a Tribunales Viejos, ahí en el edificio histórico, al despacho de ella. Me estaba esperando, estaba la directora del Banco de Datos Genéticos también. Y empezamos a hablar de lechuzas, justamente, porque ella colecciona lechuzas. Tiene miles de lechuzas, la Servini de Cubría, en unas especies de vitrinas enormes. Y hablamos de lechuzas, hablamos de cualquier cosa. Cuando me dice, bueno, mira, Estela, yo te llamé porque tenemos que darte una muy buena noticia. Dice, hemos encontrado a tu nieto Guido. Cuando me dice eso, fue como una especie de luz, de un baño de no sé qué, se me entró en el cuerpo. Yo soy tranquila, soy moderada. Pegué unos saltos, pegué unos gritos, nos abrazamos, lloramos juntas. Y dice, bueno, me cuentan, como vino, cuando me serené, me cuentan el resultado. Por eso estaba la señora del banco, el 99.99, y un ochito por ahí, ese 8, le sirve a mi nieto decir que, bueno, a mí yo me lo haría de nuevo porque hay una duda. En broma, por supuesto, porque es categórico.
Vino mi hermano a buscarme, de aquí nos fuimos a Buenos Aires. El viaje más largo me pareció que había ido a Ushuaia, porque no llegábamos nunca. Llegamos, estaba mamá ya en Abuelas, con mi otro hermano, que vive en Capital, con Remo. Y ahí yo lo llamo por teléfono.
Me llama mi tía, me dice, soy Claudia Carlotto. Yo en el momento obviamente no sabía que era mi tía. Me dice, soy Claudia Carlotto, te llamo para avisarte que, bueno, que el examen dio positivo.
Ah, caramba, dice, ¿no? Muy así. Sí, dieron positivo. Lamento tener que decírtelo por teléfono, pero temo que te enteres por otro medio, porque esto ya, no por nosotros, pero ha tomado estado público. Ah, sí, dice. Sí, porque te tengo que decir que además de que sos hijo de desaparecidos, sos el nieto de Estela Carlotto, o sea, sos mi sobrino. Y ahí fue donde se me quebró la voz.
Hay una versión encontrada, porque ella asegura que me lo dijo con una serenidad meridiana y con voz de azafata. Yo puedo asegurar que no fue así.
Y yo creo que no tardó nada en volver a llamar para decir estoy allí mañana. Voy para allá mañana. Y vino.
Llegó al mediodía, porque venía de Olavarría. Venía con su mujer y con 4 amigos músicos, que son como su familia elegida, ¿no? Y nada, se perdieron y no llegaban. Y bueno, yo estaba en la puerta esperando cuando ellos llegan. Y nada, yo lo abracé todo lo que pude. Pero la verdad, todos en ese momento estábamos muy pendientes del encuentro con mamá.
El primer día cuando nos encontramos, ¿viste? Los primeros momentos de charla, ¿viste? Naturalmente había una situación de tensión rara, ¿viste? Porque es como, sabés que es tu abuela, ella sabe que soy el nieto, pero bueno, a ver quién será. De hecho, yo la conocía mucho más a ella que ella a mí, ¿no es cierto? Entonces yo de alguna manera sabía con quién me iba a encontrar tangencialmente y ella no tenía ni idea. Entonces estábamos ahí en la casa de mi tía, ¿viste? Y los primeros momentos, y bueno, y hablando un poco, y cómo habían llegado, y que nos habíamos perdido, y eso, y en un momento trae unos sándwiches de miga, y yo le digo, la miro y le digo, 36 años esperando sándwiches de miga. Una vergüenza esto. Y ella se pone así, me mira y me dice, igual quédate tranquilo que la salida te lo cobramos. ¿Viste? Como que a partir de ahí arrancó, todo se distendió un poco y bueno, ya empezó como la charla más tranquila.
Yo no le pregunto nada. Yo soy la abuelita, que lo quiero mucho, él lo sabe, que ha venido a esta casa y ha cocinado para mí. Él dice, no, abuela, no cocines, que yo hoy cocino yo te voy a cocinar. Y ha hecho una pasta riquísima, o si le gusta la pasta frola yo le hago, se la llevo o se la hago acá. Mirá, hay algo cómico, yo viajo mucho y se me ocurre comprarle juguetes simbólicos, un avión de estos de colección o parecidos, o un auto que es de varón también, y juguetes. Y lo dije en una charla en Olavarría como una broma. Y yo todavía le compro juguetes. Y estaba él y le gritó, y seguime comprando, ¿eh? O sea que le gustan. Entonces es como que quiero llenar esos tiempos que no pude, pero en los tiempos de él.
Justo me enteré por los informativos de Buenos Aires, y la verdad que fue una sorpresa y una alegría a la vez.
Hasta hicimos un asado, vos imagínate lo que fue para todos.
La verdad fue un clima muy intenso, hubo mucha gente que se juntó aquí en la plaza, con los medios de comunicación y demás, todo el mundo también sorprendido, preguntándose por qué, cómo, justo acá.
Mi familia, a través de mi hija y mi yerno, que es empleado de Loma Negra, conocían a la familia, ya los conocían a ellos. Así que, bueno, un gran alegrón, ¿no es cierto?
Llegué del trabajo al mediodía y me dice mi señora, ¿sabes quién es el nieto, dice, de Estela de Carlotto? ¿No? Digo, no tengo la menor idea. Dice, Ignacio Urban.
Fue una explosión, la verdad fue algo que era el comentario en los almacenes más simples, porque fue una sorpresa. Realmente, uno lo veía que encontraban en diferentes lugares, pero de verdad uno no se imagina que justamente en la ciudad donde uno vive van a encontrar a un chico que le habían arrebatado a una familia.
Ella no pensó por ella pensó por los demás. Porque ella calculo que nunca pensó que iba a recuperar a su nieto. Ella luchó por los demás. Yo creo que ella luchó por los demás. Y la vida le dio una sorpresa. Por tener buen corazón.
El hombre que lo entregó, Aguilar, muy amigo mío, muy amigo de toda la vida, lo hemos conocido. Yo trabajé en el club estudiante de 30 años de gerente, fui hasta jubilarme, y él empezó con hipismo, porque tenían unas pistas de hipismo, y después se ligó al club, a la comisión directiva. Así que yo como gerente lo trataba todos los días prácticamente, porque él venía siempre al club.
En una ciudad donde cada uno sabe quién es y sabe que en esos están también quienes entregaron y llevaron a la muerte a los que caminaban por las mismas calles, y yo no creo que los puedan tratar igual que no hizo nada o al que fue víctima.
Ves mis sueños nuevos ya no se amansan detrás de ti.
Había cosas que no se contaban en las escuelas. La idea del terrorismo de Estado y todo lo que había sucedido en las dos dictaduras y una parte importante de la historia más reciente de la Argentina, esa historia que vengo a descubrir después que me involucra tan directamente, yo no la conocía hasta que me fui a estudiar a Buenos Aires. Luego, con el tiempo, las cosas, la música y el arte y diferentes situaciones me fueron acercando como constantemente a las abuelas y a las causas de los derechos humanos sin saberlo. Yo lo hacía como una manera de colaborar también, sin saber que era una historia que me atravesaba completamente en todos los aspectos.
O sea que hay que hacer también un rescate de la identidad de cada ciudad de nuestro país, de cada provincia y del país en su conjunto, para que cada quien ocupe su lugar en la historia. Por suerte hay justicia, lenta pero existe, se está haciendo, con civiles también, y ya vendrán también el enjuiciamiento, si no es de los tribunales, porque no hay elementos probatorios, de la sociedad.
Nunca calculé la dimensión de lo que iba a suceder después, ¿no? Y que automáticamente los medios te persigan y estar en una situación de persecución casi como si fuera un delincuente. Y bueno, y después el bautismo que me hicieron con un nombre que no es el mío, que el mundo te llama Guido porque te buscaron como Guido y que es legítimo para la familia pero no para el mundo. Y bueno, y entender ese proceso de identidad, ¿no? Entender quién sos, que es un proceso que uno lo hace a lo largo de toda una vida y a los 36 años ya lo entiende y bueno, yo lo tengo que volver a hacer. Creo que hay cuestiones que se heredan naturalmente, esta historia lo prueba, pero me parece que la identidad es una construcción que uno va haciendo sobre sí mismo todo el tiempo. Y por eso que digo, bueno, no, yo soy Ignacio, pero no es una decisión que tomo. O sea, no es que yo decido, hoy me levanté y digo, no, hoy me voy a llamar Ignacio. No, no es una decisión. Yo soy Ignacio. Porque toda mi vida construí arriba de ese nombre y ese nombre es quien yo soy. Y no soy Guido. Y es lamentable, yo sé que quizás suene chocante porque es el nombre que me puso mi mamá. Pero hay un tiempo cuando vos sos chico en que vos sos como te llaman y después sos quien te llamás vos. Y bueno, yo hace años que me llamo como me llamo y que soy quien yo me llamo. Entonces ya no puedo cambiar eso. Y si yo lo cambiaba, era una manera de negar esa historia y era una manera de desdecir mi identidad.
Yo lo busqué 36 años como Guido. Su mamá dijo que si era varón lo llamáramos Guido. Ahora yo le dije, te entiendo perfectamente. Vos tenés que tener la libertad de hacer lo que vos querés. Y esa es tu decisión y no hay nada que decir. Lo único que me vas a permitir, yo te voy a llamar Guido. Y él dijo, sí, abuela, ¿vos? Sí. Pero fíjate que me parece que ni eso siquiera voy a hacer, porque fue una etapa y fue algo fuera de él, decidido. Y él es el que tiene que decidir ahora.
Con la carroña empiñada, los nudos de otra madera apuran chispas hirientes y encienden lumbres de ojeras. Cargando en ancas los hombros van, se quedando los años. No se han cerrado las puertas ni las heridas de antaño. Fantasma viejo y roído.
Esta alegría enorme que me brinda hoy la vida de encontrar lo que busqué y buscamos.
Si lapidando al poeta se cree matar la memoria, ¿qué más le queda a esta tierra que va perdiendo su historia? Camino al sol, que hace las sombras de todo igual. Si al estrujar el viento contra un pecho labriego, ya no hay heridas que marquen los brazos del hombre entero, ni hay canciones que apañen lo que no guardan el pecho.
Gracias a la vida, porque lo que yo quería es no morirme sin abrazarlo.
¡Mi compañero tenía desaparecido! ¡Mi compañero tenía desaparecido! ¡Mi compañero tenía desaparecido! ¡Ahora! ¡Ahora! ¡Ahora!
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR. Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, access and analysis of political, economic, and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The world today. Mondays on TeleSUR. In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR.
Hello, you're watching TeleSUR English. I'm Gladys Quesada, and these are the headlines at this hour. Argentina President Cristina Fernandez has questioned the legitimacy and the impartiality of the Supreme Court, accusing the judicial body of breaking laws to favor former President Mauricio Macri. The vice president said that the judiciary has become a political party that persecutes the forces that oppose it and leaves citizens basically on probation. Cristina Fernandez shared an audiovisual document on her social media featuring a revealing tour that lays bare how justice works at the nation's highest court. Fernandez also said that the sentence against her on the Validad trial is already written and signed, and that she has been subjected to a bias. In the audiovisual document shared by the Vice President Fernandez, she says that Macri's decision opened the way for the process of political, judicial, and media persecution that has been unleashed throughout Latin America. At least 13 people were killed and another 2 injured in clashes between inmates of a prison in the city of Santo Domingo in north-central Ecuador. The National Police, the Armed Forces, and the Ministry of Public Health were called to the emergency. Later on, the National Service for the Comprehensive Care of Adults Deprived of Their Liberty and Adolescent Offenders said it had recovered control of the prison known as Bellavista. The same prison was hit by violence on May 9th, resulting in the death of 44 inmates. The Ecuadorian prison system has been affected with a serious crisis due to confrontations between rival drug trafficking gangs. In 2021, the country saw a wave of prison riots that left more than 300 inmates dead. On Monday, Moscow and Tehran confirmed that their respective national oil companies have signed a historical cooperation memorandum. The energy giants reached this agreement while Europe is experiencing the worst crisis in history, and part of the world is affected by the effects of Brussels' decisions. Iranian National Oil Company and the Russian energy giant Gazprom signed on Tuesday a memorandum of cooperation. Once the agreement was made public, Mohsen Kostemer, the executive director of the Iranian oil company, said that this is the largest foreign investment in the history of Iranian oil industry and that it is expected to bring in millions of dollars for the development of gas and oil fields. The details and the scope of the agreement will be announced in the coming hours. And those are the headlines at this hour. For this and more stories, go to our website at telesurenglish.net.
Welcome to the Healthy News of TeleSUR. I like to accompany you. I'm Janani Flores, ready to inform you. We know that nowadays children and also adults consume a lot of sweets. That's when the problem and intestinal parasites begin. To our right, that is why there will be our central theme this week. But first, we review what's happening in the recent days in terms of health.
In Peru, sanitary graduates fumigated in Lima, the capital, the gigantic cemetery of Nueva Esperanza, considered the largest in all of South America with 60 hectares of vegetation. The work was aimed at eradicating the mosquito that transmits dengue, in an attempt to control a new outbreak of this endemic disease in Peru, which has killed about 30 people this year. Due to the large size of this place, the breeding grounds of larvae and mosquitoes in the water reach a large part of the population.
The appearance of cases that are beginning has to lead us to take immediate action, so the Directors LimaSur taking preventive actions before this begins. To increase begins to tackle the potential breeding grounds of Aedes aegypti. This intervention will also be carried out in other places where cases are reported.
Reported cases of dengue exceed 26,000 nationwide this year, and authorities are conducting a campaign to raise awareness of the importance of not leaving water in the vats of the grapes.
I thought it was like any harmless mosquito and it was going around. We wanted to kill him, but we couldn't. And the next day it stayed. And the morning I see my vase of flowers and see that they move like little fish. I thought it was little fish. And there were like millions of mosquitoes.
The New Hope of Virgin Cemetery of Lourdes was opened in 1961. According to municipality of Villa María del Triunfo, it receives 2 million visitors a year, so it's crucial to maintain epidemiological controls in place. The National Library of Medicine of the United States released several symptoms of depression, among which are irritable or low mood most of the time, difficulty falling asleep or excessive sleep, large change in appetite, often with weight gain or loss, decreased pleasure in activities that usually make you happy, inactivity and withdrawal from usual activities, feelings of hopelessness or abandonment. Depression is often passed down through families, and this may due to genes, learned behaviors at the home or in your environment. It can also be triggered by a stressful, unhappy event in life, although often it is a combination of these factors. Therefore, if the person suffers from severe depression, they may need a hospital stay or participate in a patient treatment program until the symptoms improve, which is why it is important to consult a health expert to attend to these types of situations that compromise our mental and body stability. A new study published in the journal Cancer Causes and Control links high fish consumption with an increased risk of malignant melanoma. Melanoma is the deadliest type of skin cancer with few forms of prevention. Researchers at Brown University in the United States analyzed the diet and health of nearly 500,000 Americans and calculated the incidence of malignant melanomas that developed over an average period of 15 years using data obtained from cancer registries. Among them, they identified approximately 5,000 cases. In 2011, another study already suggested that melanoma was the only type of tumor that could be associated with a higher intake of fish. Now, this expanded monitoring has allowed to consolidate the data on this relationship. Meanwhile, the consumption of this product has not stopped growing. Given the considerable limitations of the research, the authors suggest that further research will be necessary in order to truly attribute a relationship to fish intake with melanoma risk. Currently, nutritionists do not recommend any changes to advice on fish consumption.
Which are the health important dates? Let's go know them.
Health important dates. The 27th of June, World Microbiome Day. It commemorates the importance of microbes in preserving the health of human beings. Overuse and misuse of antibiotics can cause bacteria to become resistant to antibiotics, making them ineffective. Every 27th of June, the International Day of Deafblind is commemorated, a unique condition where the person presents a total or partial limitation of the senses of distance, vision, and hearing. The commemoration responds to the declaration of their basic needs. The 3rd of July, World Day of Broad Thumb Syndrome, a rare pathology that affects 1 in 150,000 births. It is a rare disease, usually caused by a genetic mutation. It is characterized by thick thumbs and toes, short stature, particular facial features, and varying degrees of intellectual disability.
We continue with the healthy muse of TeleSUR. When was the last time you dewormed? It is something that is recommended to do every 6 months because these microorganisms advance and grow uncontrollably. They can even reach our brain. It is common to feel healthy person but actually be full of parasites since they usually do not cause obvious symptoms. In this issue, we will reveal how we can effectively deworm ourselves to prevent those organisms from taking away our nutrients and life slowly.
Parasites are microorganisms that live inside living beings to be able to feed on these. Intestinal parasites are lodged within the intestines and have the ability to reproduce, causing discomfort and infection in those who suffer from it.
There are intestinal worms. Many times they attack us, but many times they attack our children. So it is important that we know that there may be infections of intestinal worms, and what solutions are there for it. That if this happens chronically, it will generate chronic problems in your health. In many cases, I have patients who have chronic diseases, but that everything can be explained by parasites. They are tested and turn out negative. Many studies are done and turn out negative.
Many people unknowingly suffer from parasitic infections that can be a contributing factor to constant chronic health problems.
Many times you have a child who sleeps well and at the moment begins not to sleep well, begins to wake up, go to bed at night, or so on. Suspect about it. If it changes the sleep, suspect intestinal worms. What you have to do is for one to get very observant, observe the area of the anus, that is where they go out at night, because they go out. And if you see little things coming out of there moving, little ones, you already know that the child is infected with intestinal worms, and it's something that can be resolved.
Among the most common symptoms and signs in a patient with intestinal parasites are digestive problems, constipation, diarrhea or persistent gas, skin problems, eczema, hives and itching, muscle and joint pain, fatigue and persistent tiredness, excessive appetite, constant hunger, iron deficiency anemia, teeth grinding during sleep, recurrent infections, presence of white spots in stool, itching of the anus or vagina, especially at night. Children may have an uneasy sleep.
It is an issue that sometimes parents can send the children to the psychiatrist. I have heard parents who took children to the psychiatrist because the child was not still. He had attention deficit supposedly. In truth, what the poor child had were worms, and the worms altered the itching, altered the nervous system, and the child could not stay restless. Then you can diagnose it as one of those care deficit nonsense to try to medicate when you actually have is a worm infection.
This microorganism can suck nutrients for years without the person noticing. Parasites can be found anywhere, but the main reason they appear is health deficiency. Those people who live in places where water has not been properly purified, is used and consumed, have higher risk of contracting parasites. Consuming vegetables or fruit that are not well washed, the presence of pets and the existence of eggs on the nails and touching the mouth increase the risk of contagion.
They come in fruit, they can come in vegetables, they can come in meat, they can come in different places. The issue is that once they enter the body, and as the body has an appropriate temperature for reproduction, a warm temperature, it is humid, it is dark, then these worms take over and make their home the intestine. At night, they tend to go out through the area of the anus, and already in the morning they get back inside. So the time to detect it is at night.
Washing your hands very well when leaving the bathroom, disinfecting food, cooking meat very well, drinking water, maintaining good personal hygiene and proper food preparations is the solution.
In addition to follow the treatment, what you have to do is to maintain proper hand hygiene, especially under the nails. Change the towels, change the sheets where the child has slept, put in close pajamas to prevent scratching. These measures will prevent the rest of the family from having worms.
Most parasites do not give any symptoms, and only when their infestation is very severe is that the symptoms are observed. For this reason, it is advisable to deworm at least once a year, every 6 months, in case of very unsanitary conditions. There are specific drugs that directly kill or paralyze the shape or cycle life of each parasite.
On the other hand, also a good immune system is the key to keep an intestinal flora at bay and strongly avoid bacterial overgrowth.
There are also natural alternatives. One of the most effective to combat intestinal worms is a combination of coconut oil with castor oil. Coconut oil contains a compound that kills parasites, bacteria, and fungi called lauric acid. Mixing half coconut oil and half castor oil in a tablespoon and consuming for 2 or 3 days will give good results.
If you want to be a little more inclusive and add the deworming to your body, at the time when you consider that the overgrowth may be given by parasites and not necessarily by bacteria, you can make a deworming that is made extremely easy by following the instructions of any antiparasitic tincture, including ingredients such as mugwort, black walnut, shell cloves, fennel seeds, or other seeds, etc.
Since ancient times, garlic has been considered an antiparasitic or anthelmintic plant. There are people who have the habit of consuming a whole garlic daily for that purpose. It contains a very powerful substance called allicin, a molecule that has sulfur and that gives its characteristic smell. It is also beneficial to reduce blood pressure, cholesterol, and other harmful conditions in the human body. Experts point out that studies have been able to observe how the consumption of garlic can help reduce the parasitic load on the body. Pumpkin seeds are not only extremely nutritious and excellent supplement, but can be considered deadly to parasites. This ability lies in 2 important components called carpain and charasin. Both substances have been found to destroy and expel parasites or worms that may be in the intestines. Ginger also has an anthelmintic effect and can be consumed in tea. The papaya seed is considered parasitized just like turmeric tea and oregano oil.
They can help you to get rid of small parasites because papaya seeds and garlic serve for large parasites, while the shell of carrots serves for small parasites, and that they do for 12 days, and with that you can have a very deep cleaning of the colon and you can take out all the parasites that you may be consuming. Many of the nutrients you need to be able to repair what does not work well in your body.
Avoiding the consumption of sugar and contaminated food will help keep us free of these microorganisms and other bacteria that make us susceptible to diseases. In addition, a diet rich in vegetable seeds, vegetables, and fruit will help keep the immune system in good condition to fight them, and hygiene to avoid the risk of contagion.
Now that we have all this knowledge, we are going to complete with a series of simple recommendations to avoid parasites, which perfectly serve the whole family. To take paper and pencil, let's see.
Recommendations to avoid parasites. Maintain good hygiene when cooking, disinfecting food and cooking meats well. Do not put contaminated hands in the eyes or mouth. Avoid consuming sugars as is the main food of parasites. Drinking water, consume anthelmintic foods. Constantly deworming pets. Deworming once a year or every 6 months.
We continue with the healthy news of TeleSUR. Our positive note places us in Venezuela, where a family business motivates users with a type of mutilations to break prejudices. More information and more following material with our correspondent Leonel Lertamal from the capital, Caracas.
Leonel is a musician and promotes himself as the double of the salsa player Gilberto Santa Rosa. While waiting for the date of his processes, he regularly comes to the Bionics song workshops to accompany with his guitar the work of the orthopedic technicians. Society has a number of prejudices that have been generated by the system itself. Of those prefigurations, then when they see you with a lip less, they exclude you, because a lot of awareness is missing. As I always say with some messages I share in social media, people with disability are not dispossessions of society. We are very useful people. We have diverse capacities. This Venezuelan enterprise manufactures custom prostheses and seeks to break prejudices towards people who have some time of mutilation. The project began with a family tragedy of this mechatronics engineer, and after 6 years of work, they have manufactured more than 500 prostheses. Not just adapting devices for one person, which are increasingly complicated by import costs. We wanted to be the first house in Venezuela to manufacture components, and we wanted to be a platform for professionals in the area of health, rehabilitation, and orthoprosthetics, who were also amputees, to have a better connection with our users. In addition to technical innovations, the group stands out for including people who have a disability. The technicians and medical personnel themselves who use prostheses play a role of motivation for new users. At the time I was in rehab and therapy, I was motivated by how they put people walking. And I said, this is going to be for life for me. I'm going to put people to walk. I'm going to study for this and prepare. Throughout that journey, I have prepared myself in orthopedics with professional people, and every day learning more from this team. Francis, for example, is preparing to climb this year to the top of Roraima, the tallest mountain in Canaima National Park, one of the oldest geological formations on the planet.
I used to wear pants. I was sorry they knew I was a prosthetic user. It was like a taboo I had, an internal fight. Knowing these new concepts, these new cultures that has Bionic Zone, where I discovered my own personality, to be able to wear a dress and be able to go out on the street.
The venture won a competition from the Ministry of Science and Technology for its innovations and seeks to continue growing with its designs towards Colombia. The team is proud of the achievements made.
Many people use prosthetics, but if you see them, you don't realize it's because they hate it. We go a little further, show it, feel comfortable with it, accept yourself, love yourself, and show it to the world.
Beyond our processes, what they propose is social inclusion and a different way of seeing disability, not as an impediment, but as a possibility. Leonel Retamal, TeleSUR, Caracas, Venezuela.
So we come to an end to this broadcast. I remind you our point of contacts on the screen. You can see them. Instagram, find us at Guía Tu Cuerpo TeleSUR. On Twitter, at Guía Tu Cuerpo TLS. Mine at Dier Flores account. If you prefer, we can put at your disposal the email guiatucuerpo@telesurtv.net. And I invite you to review our previous broadcast on YouTube. I'm Yerani Flores. Thank you for joining us as allowing us to influence your quality of life. See you next week here at Guide Your Body.
Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. And I ask you to please give thanks that only for God's noise was peace here today as part of a movement to build a new society. Make no mistake, racism starts with the state to divide and rule the working class to keep us broken, not building anew. Lessons of history revealed, organize or be displaced. The rulers have no solutions, only violence, wars and jails. Stick together and fight for your just claims. Workers united will prevail. Oh, say, can you see Rome is over? Oh, build a new. 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 Oh, build a new.
Argentina's Vice President Cristina Fernandez has questioned the legitimacy and the impartiality of the Supreme Court, accusing the judicial body of breaking laws to favor the former president Mauricio Macri. At least 13 people were killed and another 2 injured in clashes between inmates of a prison in the city of Santo Domingo in north-central Ecuador. Moscow and Tehran confirmed that their respective national oil companies have signed a historic cooperation memorandum, while Europe is experiencing the worst energy crisis in its history. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. Argentina's Vice President, Cristina Fernandez, has questioned the legitimacy and impartiality of the Supreme Court, accusing the judicial body of breaking laws to favor the former president, Mauricio Macri. The vice president said that judiciary has become a political party that persecutes the forces that oppose it and leaves citizens basically on probation. Cristina Fernandez shared an audiovisual document on her social media featuring a revealing tour that lays bare how justice works at the nation's highest court. Fernandez also said that the sentence against her on the Vialidad trial is already written and signed, and that she has been subjected to a bias. In the audiovisual document shared by the Vice President Fernandez, she says that Macri's decision opens a way for the process of political, judicial, and media persecution that has been unleashed throughout the Latin American. This Monday in Argentina, Delia Giovanola, 96 years old, one of the founder members of the Plaza de Mayo Grandmothers Association, has passed away. The association has bid farewell with great sadness to the person they described as a militant of memory, truth, justice, and joy. A beloved grandmother, Delia Giovanola, after almost 4 years of struggle, was able to locate and meet her grandson Martin in 2015. Argentinian President Alberto Fernandez praised Giovanola and said this tireless woman will remain as an outstanding example for generations to come. In Panama, the 3 organizations that coordinate the protests against the high cost of living and corruption in that country have decided to unite, and they wanted to clearly state that it was the executive the one that withdrew from the dialogue table. The Alliance of the People, the Alliance of Native Peoples, and the National Alliance for the Rights of the Organized People will hold a meeting this Tuesday to reach a consensus on what issues will be discussed with the government. In addition to the demands already made to the executive, like lower prices for fuel, the basic food basket, and medicines, now they have included the fight against corruption. Luis Arturo Sanchez, member of the Teachers Union and spokesperson for ANADEPO, said that they reject the biased mediation of the Ombudsman's office and that their stand reflects the interests of the Panamanian people.
A message to the whole country, especially to the government, that with its dirty tactics wants to destroy the national popular movement. We have had its first encounter to confirm a single united front, that we are a single popular force, which is what the whole country wanted.
Regarding the versions spread by several media and the government representatives, the indigenous leaders of the dialogue table at San Feliz denounced the kidnapping of their right to freedom of expression. They ratified that it was the Panamanian executive the first to leave the table.
Regarding the versions spread by several media and government representatives, the indigenous leader of the dialogue table at San Feliz denounced the kidnapping of their right to freedom of expression. They ratified that it was the Panamanian executive the first to leave the table. We have shown our total disposition, our best behavior, our willingness to work for the common good, but the government has left the table. So, for the moment, we have also left the table.
The Nicaraguan people held vigils throughout the country to celebrate the 43rd anniversary of the 1979 revolution against dictator Anastasio Somoza. Nicaraguans took to the streets waving flags of the Sandinista National Liberation Front and honored those who gave their lives for the homeland 43 years ago. Earlier, motorcades toured Managua and other cities in the country, showing people's support and affection for the revolution, the National Front, and the government of President Daniel Ortega. Heads of government, progressive leaders, and representatives of political, social, and indigenous organizations arrived in Nicaragua to join in the celebrations. With 95 confirmed cases, Peru became the South American country with the highest number of monkeypox cases confirmed per million inhabitants. According to data from the World Health Organization and Peru's National Center for Epidemiology, Disease Prevention and Control, the nation showed 1.46 cases per million citizens, a higher rate than even Brazil, the country with the highest number of people infected in South America. Numbers published by the Peruvian Ministry of Health registered that the disease is present in 8 of the 25 departments in the country, and the highest numbers are found in 5 districts of the metropolitan Lima: Surco, Jesús María, Pueblo Libre, Cercado de Lima, and San Martín de Porres. Venezuela and the world celebrates the extraordinary athlete Yulimar Rojas, who made history on Monday by becoming the first to win 3 world triple jump titles. Rojas, 26 years old, won gold at the 2022 World Championships in Athletics in Eugene, in Oregon, the U.S., with a record of 15.47 meters. The Venezuelan athlete achieved this mark, the best of the season, in her second jump in front of some 10,000 fans at the Hayward Field Stadium. She clearly beat Jamaican Shanika Ricketts, who took silver with 14.89 meters, and the U.S. Tori Franklin, who came third with 14.72 meters. In fourth place, with a jump of 14.7 meters, was Cuban athlete Leyanis Perez. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR.
El mundo se mueve constantemente y todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos. Se mueve la geopolítica mundial. Nos preguntamos qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento, cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan. Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. At least 13 people were killed and another 2 injured in clashes between inmates on a prison in the city of Santo Domingo in north-central Ecuador. The National Police, the Armed Forces, and the Ministry of Public Health were called to the emergency. Later on, the National Service for the Comprehensive Care of Adults Deprived of Their Liberty and Adolescents Offenders said it had recovered control of the prison known as Bellavista. The same prison was hit by violence on May 9th, resulting in the death of 44 inmates. The Ecuadorian prison system has been affected with a serious crisis due to confrontations between rival drug trafficking gangs. In 2021, the country saw a wave of prison riots that left more than 300 inmates dead. Cuban authorities responsible for managing electricity supply keep looking for alternatives in the national industry to maintain the service affected by the obstacles imposed by Washington's blockade to the acquisition of new equipment. The state-run company, Unión Eléctrica, undertakes maintenance works to preserve the equipment, although it recognizes there are specific parts that can only be purchased abroad. The country is going through a complex situation in the sector due to the breakdowns of the main power plants involved in the national energy system. Arles Luna, the director of distributed generation at Unión Eléctrica, stated on national television that the institution is working to find alternatives to overcome the situation.
The equipment that we have out of service is under maintenance works aimed at preserving them, and as the necessary resources are available for this recovery in the groups, they will be recovered and can join the energy system. In other words, the conditions exist, they are created, and we have qualified staff to carry them out.
Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel held a meeting with professors from the Pedagogical University Enrique José Varona in Havana, where he evaluated the comprehensive training of the teaching staff. At the meeting, professors presented the project Pedagogical Integrity in Training University Professors, a result of the diagnosis made by teachers and students at the university. In this project, they found gaps created by the quarantine time during the COVID-19 pandemic. Professors and students also discuss issues related to the cultural training, the lack of visits to museums, and access to the lectures. However, the project showed the students' bond and admiration towards the professors. The Cuban head of state highlighted the importance of the project and called on it to reach professors from all degrees and active teachers. The United Nations Human Rights Office expressed concern about the rising violence around Haiti's capital, saying 99 people have been killed in the recent fighting between rival gangs in the city Solel district alone. The warning came hours after the UN Security Council unanimously approved a resolution renewing the mandate of UN office in the troubled Caribbean nation and called on all the countries to stop the transfer of small arms, light weapons and ammunition to anyone there supporting gun violence and criminal activity. According to data reported by the UN Humanitarian Affairs Coordination Office in Haiti, documented from January to the end of June, more than 900 killings, nearly 700 injuries, and same number of kidnappings across the capital. UN spokespersons urged the authorities in Haiti to ensure fundamental rights are protected and placed at the front of the center of the responses to the crisis. Now we move on to other topics. Two earthquakes hit Afghanistan's Paktika and Badakhshan provinces, injuring at least 10 people. According to authorities, the eastern Paktika province's Gayan district, which was severely devastated by a 6.1 magnitude earthquake on June 22, was struck again by a quake. The provincial governor's office said several residences were damaged and the teams have been rushed to the scene to rescue people. The earthquake had a magnitude of 5.1 and was centered at a depth of 10 kilometers in the Kos province. The second quake struck the northeastern province of Badakhshan with a magnitude of 4.3 and its epicenter was in the province's Jorm district. European government representatives met in Berlin, Germany, to analyze the emergency climate situation in the region. More than 1,000 people have died in Europe due to the current heat wave. The south of Europe is experiencing a heat wave with record temperatures already exceeding 40 degrees Celsius. The entry of a warm air mass from the Sahara, which has already hit France and the United Kingdom, will cause several cities to experience unprecedented high temperatures. To make matters worse, there is the constant threat of wildfires, like it's recently been the case in Portugal, France and Spain. The heat wave is also affecting countries such as Belgium, Italy, Greece and Turkey. The respective governments are trying to reinforce security measures and emergency services. In view of the seriousness of the situation, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the world must choose between collective action or collective suicide. The United Kingdom on Tuesday recorded its hottest ever temperature reading, with the mercury rising to 39.1 degrees Celsius in the southern town of Sherwood, according to the Met Office Weather Service. The record-breaking day followed the country's warmest ever night, with temperatures in some regions remaining above 25 degrees Celsius. The UK's previous all-time record high of 38.7 Celsius was set in 2019. Tuesday's record could be broken again as the day goes on, with temperatures expected to continue rising. British officials issued the UK's first ever extreme heat emergency, extending from London in the south to Manchester and Leeds in the north. Train services were disrupted by buckled rails, and more travel disruption were expected. And Belgium's Pays d'Azur, located in the Wallonia in the province of Hainaut, puts special measures in place to protect animals and the visitors from the heat. The animals are given frozen food, fruit suspended in water, and extra showers to alleviate the impact of the extreme high temperatures on them. Also, the visitors can enjoy a fresh mist that helps them to tour the facilities without suffocating. Big state-run museums, primarily in Brussels, took the unusual step of offering free access on Tuesday to people over 65 to help them to stay cool. Experts blame climate change for the latest heat wave and note that the more frequent extreme weather will only worsen in years to come. The heat wave, the second to engulf parts of Europe in recent weeks, has contributed to deadly wildfires in France, Greece, Portugal and Spain, destroying vast tracts of land. In a related news, the 11th meeting of Environment Ministers of Ibero-America has kicked off in the Dominican Republic. On its first day, there was one common demand: more action and more resources are needed to mitigate the current serious climate crisis. Representatives of Ibero-American governments, along with the representatives of international organizations such as the United Nations, have agreed that the current climate situation is unprecedented. At the meeting, they acknowledged that the governments are obliged to send political signals and guarantee transparency and long-term and political certainty in the management of the current situation. Latin America and the Caribbean Regional Climate Change Coordinator of the United Nations Environment Program, Gustavo Mañez, said that the current climate crisis is huge and that it requires financing. Along the same lines, Andrea Mesa, the Secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, described the situation as a planetary crisis. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, access and analysis of political, economic and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The World Today. Mondays on TeleSUR. Who's moving the chessmen? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. On Monday, Moscow and Tehran confirmed that their respective national oil companies have signed a historic cooperation memorandum. The energy giants reached this agreement while Europe is experiencing the worst crisis in its history, and part of the world is affected by the effects of Brussels' decisions. Iranian National Oil Company and the Russian energy giant Gazprom signed on Tuesday a memorandum of cooperation. Once the agreement was made public, Mohsen Kastemir, the executive director of the Iranian oil company, said that this is the largest foreign investment in the history of the Iranian oil industry, and that is expected to bring in millions of dollars for the development of gas and oil fields. The details and the scope of the agreement will be announced in the coming hours. Russian President Vladimir Putin arrived in Tehran on Tuesday to attend a trilateral summit with the leaders of Iran and Turkey. This is the first official visit of the Russian head of state since the beginning of the special military operation in Ukraine. Before the trilateral meeting, Putin met separately with Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev. The 6-year conflict in Syria, Iran's nuclear energy program, and the economic cooperation between Moscow and Tehran are expected to top the agenda of the summit. Tehran brought together Russia, Turkey, and Iran heads of state as the leaders of the sponsored countries of the Astana process, which was initiated in 2017 for peace in Syria. The International Organization for Migration confirmed that 193 asylum seekers were returned to Libya after being rescued off the coast last week. In a statement, the international organization reported that more than 10,000 people have been rescued and returned to Libya so far in 2022, including more than 600 women and 400 minors. The IOM also added that nearly 200 people died and more than 600 others went missing on the central Mediterranean route in 2022. Libya has been suffering insecurity and chaos for many years, making the North African country a preferred point of departure for the people who want to cross the Mediterranean Sea to the European shores. And TeleSUR English continues to grow. Its signal now reaches Europe. You can order it from your cable dealer or tune it yourself. These parameters that you see on screen are in place since July 1st. Quite soon, further changes will be implemented for the signals in the Middle East and Africa. Now more than ever, the world connects to us and our stories are heard in other farther away nations. This news multi-platform will continue providing truthful content to oppose the hegemonic media's narrative and our faithfulness to our audience. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But before our farewells, we would like to introduce a song written by Paulo Gomes, a farmer who lives near the city where the Brazil's former president Lula da Silva was born. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, as always, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.
Sem ter com que me preocupar, se você fosse preocupar com tudo que se passa no Brasil, você vai acabar louco no asilo. Porque ninguém liga pra ninguém, é trabalhador, sendo refém, é vereador, roubando deputado, é corrupção pra todo lado. Lula dá um jeito no nosso Brasil, Lula dá um jeito no nosso Brasil, Lula dá um jeito no nosso Brasil, Lula dá um jeito. Nos faróis das ruas você vê crianças estendendo as mãos e os velhinhos de carrinho catando papelão. Os de alta classe vê lá de cima de avião e não tá nem aí com nossa nação. Tentaram parar o herói da nação, mas Lula votou como campeão. Tentaram parar, botaram um novo, mas Lula votou pros braços do povo. As autoridades fecham os olhos para não ver que em muitos lugares não tem nada para comer. O desemprego e a fome andam na mesma mão, o alfabetismo ainda existe, falta religião. O desemprego e a fome andam na mesma mão, o alfabetismo ainda existe, falta religião. Lula dá um jeito no nosso Brasil, Lula dá um jeito.
Un canto por la América Unida. Mira, que lo escuchan ahí arriba. ¡Vamos! Somos la tierra, somos la arcilla, la esperanza que brota y germina. 500 años nos han pisoteado, aquí seguimos, de aquí no nos vamos. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta, se levanta, unido que no calla. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta, unido que no calla. Pueblo latino, vamos pa'lante, tumbando fronteras, somos gigantes, nadie se rinde, vamos para arriba, esa tierra es tuya y también es mía. Pueblo mestizo, guerrero y solidario, aquí nadie es extraño, aquí somos hermanos. Todos los países digan presente, Venezuela y Cuba presente, Nicaragua, Honduras presente, el Caribe entero. América, 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 continente se levanta, pueblo unido que no calla, no se detiene. América, 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 continente se levanta, pueblo unido que no calla. Así.
5 siglos resistiendo el atropello y el abuso. El avia ya la reflorece junto al alba, sin un solo continente porque rayos nos separa. Con Sucre y Bolívar seguimos pa'lante, pa' encima latino, no hay visa que nos pare.
Desde la Patagonia hasta el Río Bravo, los latinos levantamos la mano. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta, un ruido que no calla. América, América, lindísimo continente se levanta, un ruido que no calla. México y Bolivia, presente. Puerto Rico libre.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomoon. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
You're watching TeleSUR English. I'm Gladys Quesada, and these are the headlines at this hour. Argentina's Vice President, Cristina Fernandez, has questioned the legitimacy and impartiality of the Supreme Court, accusing the judicial body of breaking laws to favor the former President Mauricio Macri. The Vice President said that judiciary has become a political party that persecutes the forces that oppose it and leaves citizens basically on probation. Cristina Fernandez shared an audiovisual document on her social media featuring a revealing tour that lays bare how justice works at the nation's highest court. Fernandez also said that the sentence against her on the Vialidad trial is already written and signed, and that she has been subjected to a bias. In the audiovisual document shared by the Vice President Fernandez, she says that Macri's decision opened the way for the process of political, judicial, and media persecution that has been unleashed throughout Latin America. At least 13 people were killed and another 2 injured in clashes between inmates of a prison in the city of Santo Domingo in north-central Ecuador. The National Police, the Armed Forces, and the Ministry of Public Health were called to the emergency. Later on, the National Service for the Comprehensive Care of Adults Deprived of their Liberty and Adolescent Offenders said it had recovered control of the prison known as Bellavista. The same prison was hit by violence on May 9th, resulting in the death of 44 inmates. The Ecuadorian prison system has been affected with a serious crisis due to confrontations between rival drug trafficking gangs. In 2021, the country saw a wave of prison riots that left more than 300 inmates dead. On Monday, Moscow and Iran confirmed that their respective national oil companies have signed a historic cooperation of memorandum. The energy giants reached this agreement while Europe is experiencing the worst crisis in the history, and part of the world is affected by the effects of Brussels' decisions. Iranian National Oil Company and Russian energy giant Gazprom signed on Tuesday a memorandum of cooperation. Since the agreement was made public, Mohsen Kadsemer, the executive director of the Iranian oil company, said that this is the largest foreign investment in the history of the Iranian oil industry, and that it is expected to bring in millions of dollars for the development of gas and oil fields. The details and the scope of the agreement will be announced in the coming hours. And those are the headlines at this hour. For this and more stories, go to our website at telesurenglish.net.
Hello viewers, a pleasure to greet you. I am Paola Perez. The unprecedented energy crisis that is hitting the whole of Europe hard, unleashed with a greater force as a boomerang effect of the sanctions imposed by the same cabinet against Russia, as a way of punishing it for the deployment of its special operation in Ukraine. With this scenario, will Europe, which has always shown itself to be a standard barrier in the fight against climate change its priorities in this ecological publicity? Experts point out that the prices of basic supplies such as electricity, gas and fuel have risen to levels never seen before, which is having a direct impact on the purchasing power of citizens. Inflation rates several Western European countries, including France and Spain, are facing devastating forest fires triggered by a heat wave that could break temperature records. According to scientists, there is a direct link between heat waves and climate change, as greenhouse gas emissions increase in intensity, duration and frequency. Let's analyze all these contexts. Let's deploy our board. Let's start our move. Join me. With gas prices soaring and geopolitical weakness at an all-time high, countries like France have gone so far as to consider nuclear energy as green. France is one of the world's largest producers of uranium-fired electricity. Although nuclear power has other environmental problems, it currently acts as a cheap base load producer with no CO2 emissions. What progress have been made 7 years after the Paris Agreement? What about the circular economy? Let's review some statements. I would like to convey the evidence that climate change kills. It kills people, as we have seen. It also kills our ecosystem, our biodiversity, and it also destroys the most precious assets of the whole of society that is affected by these fires: their houses, their homes, their businesses, their livestock. Our African continent is at the center of these climate challenges and is affected by more than other regions, given the specificity of its situation, its limited capacity to cope with crisis, and limited funding available to overcome these difficulties. The recent food and energy crisis have exacerbated the challenges that African countries face. The recent food and energy crisis have exacerbated. In addition to the real threat posed by climate change to countries on the continent that are suffering from desertification, water scarcity, it is not easy to attribute heat wave events directly to climate change. However, what we know and what we have seen is that heat waves are becoming more frequent, more prevalent, and their temperatures are also becoming more extreme. So that kind of link over prolonged periods of time can be attributed to climate change. We can say that the evidence points to heat waves becoming more frequent and their temperatures becoming more extreme in the coming years. We add information with our correspondent Sergio Rodrigo from Andalusia, Spain. He provides us with more details and data on the subject that today focuses our attention and analysis. Hello. Hello. Indeed, Spain and also southern Europe is experiencing a strong heat wave in recent hours. Temperatures on one hand have systematically increased in all regions of the Spanish state. Even in the north of Spain have come to exceed the 40 degrees, figures that were not seen, and that has also affected the rest of the countries of Europe, because we are also seeing how even the United Kingdom is exceeding the figures of 4 degrees, temperatures that we are never seen before, and that also show that concern that is not only for the population but also for the land and the forests that are being affected by the heat wave. In the last few hours, there are more than 30 fires that affect southern Europe, mainly from Portugal, passing through Spain and reaching the south of France. And the fact is that the temperatures have made also that fires are prepared more easily, and it is also more difficult to put out the fires that further aggravate the situation of climate change that exists in this area of southwestern Europe, where desertification due to lack of rainfall makes the field burns faster, but also the temperatures make the environment much warmer. Striking an alarming figure of this heat wave is the one offered by the Spanish Ministry of Health, which warned that during the weekend more than 360 people died due to the heat wave that affects, as I say, the European territory. Thank you very much, Sergio, for your data. Let's do a global mapping of the causes and consequences of climate change. The acceleration and intensity of natural phenomena due to the harmful effects of climate change put planet Earth at risk with geopolitical effects. But there are concerns where, due to their geographical characteristics, they are more vulnerable. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and Junction Organization of the United Nations provides the following data. Arctic melting, glacier melt is estimated to be between 43% and 94% by 2100, which could lead to the complete loss of ice covering Greenland and rising sea levels. Sea levels are expected to rise by up to 7 meters by 2100. This would cause countless floods and disappearance of islands. A rise of 2.6 degrees Celsius has been reported, which could rise to 4.8 degrees Celsius by 2100. Some plant species could become extinct as a result. According to a study by the Institute for Economic and Peace based in Sydney, Australia, and published in June 2019, approximately 971 million people in the world live in the areas with high or very high exposure to hazards such as cyclones, floods, earthquakes, wildfires, and sea level rise, making them virtual environmental displaced persons. Those living in Asia-Pacific region are twice at risk. Also at severe risk are the Netherlands in Europe, Senegal in Africa, and Canada in North America. In the latter case, the temperature is warming twice as much on average as the rest of the planet. The document points out that native people are the most affected. For example, on Lennox Island in the south of Chile, inhabited by the Mi'kmaq Nation, the Atlantic waters have already submerged more than 5,000 square meters. According to a study by the Institute, let's mark the first pause in our critical move. In it, we share our strategic move with the invitation to follow us through our active Twitter accounts, @jugadacritica, @PaolaP_TeleSUR. At your disposal. The energy crisis in Europe, aggravated by sanctions against Russia, what impact will it have on the transition to other energy sources? Could climate change become a central element to geopolitical dispute? Let's participate with us. When we return, we will be back. Let's review the two main international agreements to counteract the harmful effects of climate change and prevent its acceleration. The impact of climate change over the last century set off global alarm bells. A majority of countries have set out to develop a plan to slow global warming. In 2015, the 193 member states of the United Nations adopted a commitment to a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. The so-called 2030 Agenda, with 17 Sustainable Development Goals, contains the Climate Action Plan in its 13th point, the most relevant targets of which are strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity in the face of potential natural disasters, incorporate climate change measures into national policies, strategies and plans, improving education, awareness and human institutional capacity for climate change mitigation and early warning. In parallel to the 2030 Agenda, on April 22, 2016, the so-called Paris Agreement was signed in the United Nations, which had been presented at the COP21 in its 2012 edition. It was signed by the states that accounted for 55% of global greenhouse gas emissions at the time, the number required for the pact to enter into force. To date, the signatory nations of the Paris Agreement have maintained their commitment. Others have joined, and only the United States, one of the two biggest global polluters, announced in June 2017 that it was pulling out, claiming that the agreement only seeks to redistribute alleged American wealth outside its borders. Consequently, the Trump administration said it would not affect its economy to the alleged detriment of the development of emerging nations such as India and China, a decision that was later reversed by the current President of the United States, Joe Biden, who resignated the United States in the Paris Agreement on February 19, 2021. On November 3, 2021, 120 world leaders signed important and urgent agreements to save life on Earth. India, the world's second-largest coal consumer, pledged to reduce its net emissions to zero by 2070 and set a medium-term goal of installing 500 gigawatts of renewable capacity by 2030. Brazil and Vietnam also committed to net zero emissions by 2050. If they meet their pledge in full, more than 80% of global emissions are projected to be reduced to net zero. 110 countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, Turkey, and Ecuador, signed a declaration of action to halt deforestation by 2030. The signatory countries own 85% of the world's forests. Analysts and social movements indicate that these goals will not be possible unless a paradigm shift around production and profit is promoted from institutional bodies through national and international legal frameworks. We are our guests. The analysis from Spain. We are accompanied by Tom Cuchards, leader and militant member of Más Ecologistas en Acción, and we join Carlos Mendez from Venezuela. He's chief ecologist of the Ecology Center of the Venezuelan Institute of Scientific Research, IVIC, and he's an expert in climate change. Both of you, thank you very much for your time for TeleSUR. Welcome to this critical move. I'm going to start with Carlos Mendez. I asked Tom to stay in line with us to know his first impression, the first reading around this topic, because once again the existing or not of climate change is put on the table. When this kind of phenomenon occurs, high temperatures, heat sources that have claimed lives, and which also adds to the galloping energy crisis that Europe is going through due to the sanctions it has imposed that same continent to Russia, which is generating again to put the issue on the table. What do you tell? Thank you very much, Paola. Good afternoon. Yes, we return to climate change, this time with some impressive aspect. We are talking about more than 300 people who have died in Spain. this is unfortunate. We can avoid it since we already know the climate streams are going to appear every day with greater intensity. What is worrying here is also that the nations have the historical responsibility for the mission. They seem not to be aware of what is really happening, and while we have problems from the point of energy points of view, is one of the main sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. We see how Europe, and we can deep in this, how Europe, after more than 20 years, they're telling the global south that it must make the transition towards alternative energies, is assembled in the face of the energy crisis to resume what it was in the most polluting fossil energy source is the Guardian East. In the face of a crisis, Europe itself does not keep in action its speech and doesn't take advantage of the opportunity to build transition to alternative energy, and it does return into games customers. Tom also accompanies us in this analysis. We saw in the last meeting of the COP26 many countries making agreements even during their speeches by head of states of governments making announcements and commitments. I practically do not know if the real ones qualify the real ones. The commitment to try to make that transition to cleaner energies. But it seems that this ecological advertising that maintains the old candidate who has been considered himself one of the main flag-bearing strongholds of this path, as it is changing his priorities, even more with the effect that has, not only due to the high inflation that records historical maximums, but also to the fact of the high cost of living that is generating those unilateral sanctions that they have imposed against Russia, and that serve in some way as a platform for this geopolitical game. How to understand this paradigm shift in a nation that had committed to the greatest commitment of Europe that today cannot be fulfilled, and that is being hit by climate change with these sources of heat and of course with high temperatures, where a winter that is going to be quite harsh is coming, and Spain has not ruled out continuing to stockpile coal. Good afternoon, a very cordial greeting from Environmentalists in Action to the audience of TeleSUR. Thank you. First, recounting this climate emergency situation that affects the whole world. We have not seen anything like it from, let's summarize what is happening in 2022, because there are not only heat waves in Spain, France, Portugal, Greece, or the United Kingdom, but also in much of Europe, but above all, also in North Africa. We have had heat waves in China, in Japan, in the United States, and Canada, in Siberia, in India, in Pakistan, in Turkey, in Iran. And all this leads us to a situation, as a first observation, that many times the situation of the climate emergency is treated in a quite neo-colonialist way in many Western media, because when there are deaths due to heat waves, as in the case of Spain, just correct let's say the figure, being more than 510 people dead due to heat shock in the last 7 days, more than 659 in the case of Portugal, and we have to put that in an international context with more than 350,000 deaths due to different impacts of climate change at the end of the world, and not especially the countries of the global south that are much more affected by the different extreme situations generated by climate change. What is clear is that heat waves are becoming more frequent, more intense and longer, and in this case we are talking in the northern hemisphere now, but there are many other impacts on the climate emergency that occur in the southern countries. While you have referred to the different international commitments of the countries of the European Union, and especially Spain in the climate change summits, we can say clearly that they are not in line with complying with these international commitments. This is not only because global greenhouse gas emissions continue to increase, but also in the case of Spain, national greenhouse gas emissions have increased again. And currently, with the war in Ukraine, there is a whole series of warmongering militarist political bets, a bet for the alliance NATO's multilateralism, but also for a series of energy policies that once again opt for coal as one of the most polluting and most climate change causing measures to generate electricity. But there's also a new wave in favor of nuclear energy, which is one of the most dangerous energies in the world, as we have seen in different nuclear catastrophes throughout recent history, and more especially in 2011 in Japan and Fukushima. But specifically this week, the European Commission plan to save gas, to have a safe winter in quotes. There we're going to find a whole series of positive environmental policies of the European Union itself, for example, measuring polluting gases as well as greenhouse gases, to falsify these accounts to allow absolutely dirty energies such as using coal and other fossil fuels for generating of electricity and for consumption in transportation. We are seeing a moment of no return, where we not only have to announce that this is going to be the coolest summer for the future of millions of people in the northern hemisphere, but also in other parts of the world. But we are also seeing that the announced European Green Pact and these international commitments to fight climate change, so the 2030 agenda, are supposedly defeated. They no longer even use the green makeup, but directly promote policies that are going to make them fail to comply with these commitments. But above all, they are going to encourage the large energy companies to inform. We are already seeing with the actions of Russia for that war in Ukraine, that gas from fracking, which is a hydraulic fracturing system with which a large part of the fossil gas in the U.S. is extracted, with great environmental but also social and economic impacts in this country. Is being imported. The U.S. is putting its reserves at risk with this increase in this export of oil and gas at the same time of the fall of Ukraine, but also this extraction of fossil gas with the fracking system is increasing methane emissions as much are much dangerous. The greenhouse gas carbon dioxide. Right now, Spain, but also other European countries, imports a massive amount of deliveries from the U.S., which increases the profits of energy corporations and especially the oil emissions. But at the same time, we are seeing that Spain and other countries are also from Europe are monopolizing large amounts of oil and gas from Russia. That is, they are not complying with their own sanctions at this moment. It is certainly because in reality they have never prohibited the import of gas and oil. It is still a target of actions for later, and right now we are seeing that, for example, the European Union receives a good part of the refined diesel from India, for example. Emmanuel Macron himself, recently elected president of France, and one of those who, let's say, the mask of promoting climate policies himself, the president of the United Arab Emirates, received in Paris, and also of Total. It is one of the big oil multinationals of France, and we have also seen other heads of state of the European Union in recent weeks receiving the sheikhs of the countries of the oil and gas exporting countries, as many countries are making depend of imports from Qatar, for example. The United Arab Emirates are not only are not totally insane. So we are in an absolute crisis situation, but clearly international objectives are being breached. It's international commitments, but there is also a small correction to what we heard in the report that summarized, let's say, what the Paris Agreement, because precisely the more important part was the national commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But that part was not legally binding in the Paris Agreement. Therefore, at the time, the large oil companies, but also automobile companies, the agribusiness, and the great transactional capital responsible for the climate emergency in the world in achieving what precisely that part of the Paris Agreement was not legally binding, or that is all of this is unleashing, and that these signatory countries' agreement are the ones that fail to comply precisely with the reduction of greenhouse gases, and they are also betting on movements of the past to accommodate coal, and also refers to fossil energy to try in some way to circumvent what they themselves are generating with these sanctions imposed to Russia. That is something that must also be put on the table beyond the effects that were already being unleashed by the COVID-19 pandemic, and one since leaving that legation, particularly of the economy. I ask Carlos, what is going to happen? Some say and suggest that the acceleration in the energy transition could be the key way out to try to overcome the climate crisis, and what happens with the crisis of civilization. We will be facing this situation. This is what is coming up, or we are in the midst of the storm? Well, we seem to be starting this storm. Let us analyze and let us remember that the Paris Agreement is not just about mitigating the greenhouse gas. That is to say that the Paris Agreement has a triple objective. The first goal, of course, limiting warming to 1.5 or below to 2 degrees Celsius, which retains two other very important goals that they refer to adaptation, achieving adaptation, resilience, and guaranteeing food production. The second objective, of course, depends on a very strong cooperation between the North and the South, or we would have say among those historically responsible for the emission of greenhouse gases and those who have less responsibility. And the third objective that is also is a very similar sense, is a sufficient and necessary flow of financing to achieve adaptation and mitigation. The global North have been openly failing to comply with the triple objective of Paris. Only this time, and due to the energy crisis, then the face of political propaganda is dropped, that they were sold as green, and to limit warning, to avoid this warning happens with the reduction of greenhouse gases. And this year, this moment, they say that they cannot comply, and they have no intention to comply. In that sense, of course, it is an alarm what we are witnessing. I really liked the term used by the interviewed colleague who speaks of neocolonialism. Precisely here we are witnessing what is the resurgence in the events of this neocolonialism, because, as I said, Europe has held us the idea during more than the last 20 years of being able to make an energy transition towards alternative energies, and possible what we are going to witness from now is that Europe is not going to take that path, but is going to try to shift responsibility back from what is the mitigation of greenhouse gases towards those countries with less responsibilities. So this rather what it is going to do is accentuate the inscriptions, everything. Carlos, with what you pointed out, the most concerning thing is that this transition to this another type of energy could take us to a geopolitical dispute and not of cooperation. Could that be the scenario that will Europe pose? Exactly, it is possible that this agreement, since we came from Glasgow in 2021, places an additional burden on these countries with less responsibility. The countries gathered in the interception at the UN in Bonn, they demanded that all the countries of the South return to a balance. That balance is rather not being achieved with these measures of Europe back to coal. Let's see what is going to happen now in Egypt, where the countries of the South precisely consolidate their position to seek this balance of cooperation in these aspects of greenhouse gas reduction by those historically responsible, the achievement of adaptation and the financing that must also come from these countries with historical responsibility. While we are going to have the global north in this meeting of Egypt having to justify how they have returned to coal and how they get other nations with less historical responsibility are directed in this energy transition, then the panorama that we are experiencing in administration of the actions and civilizing and of course the global environmental crisis. We have nothing left but to promote the strengthening of cooperation networks South-South to be able to somehow face this that comes to us from these recrudescence of the neocolonialism, and also of course look for technological and knowledge alternatives that respond to our needs, to the needs of the South, since we already see how the philosophy and the way of the European thinking is not working. So that of the South must emerge a new way of thinking that allows us to defeat the main problem of the global environmental crisis is capitalism, or pardon of consumption and production, which is demonstrating the whole issue of the circular economy, something that much talks and brags Europe, some in favor and some other against, which also opens the debate. And above all, so much progress have been made 7 years after the Paris Agreement in a sustainable development agenda marked by the UN. And another issue that we haven't not discussed, we are talking about environmental displaced person that already exists on the planet, who defend their rights. The issue of the circular economy is another myth created by capitalism precisely to justify a series of investments and to generate new economic benefits for a certain sector of the economic and financial political elites. Just before Carlos spoke about the energy transition plans, that is the commitment to solar and wind energy and others that require large amounts of minerals that are precisely in certain parts of the world, especially in China, but different countries of the sub-Saharan African and also in many Latin American countries. There is a whole new commitment to conflicts over these minerals because these minerals are essential for this commitment of current capitalism for the energy transition and also for the issue of digitization. It needs lithium, it needs cobalt, it needs a lot of minerals that are running out. At the same time happens with the fossil fuels. That is why there is a world energy crisis, because for years we have been running out our reserves, and the demand is greater than the capacity to increase the extraction and production of fossil fuels, as we have seen in the case of Russia, but also Algeria, and also in different countries in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, etc. That is really this situation of depletion of fossil resources is also going to occur in the depletion of minerals, and therefore we have to make a new international treaty from the peoples, from the social movements, for a fair distribution of these natural resources, because effectively Venezuela, Chile, Colombia, and many other Latin American countries have the same right to access renewable energy, solar energy, wind energy, as in the case of the populations of Asia, Africa, Europe. So that is, it must be a fair distribution of resources has to be seen to start up with these resources. What is clear is that neither the European Union nor the United States nor the elite of the global South can continue consuming the level of energy that they are currently consuming, because let's not forget that the richest 10% in the world consume huge amounts of fossil fuel materials and generate greenhouse gas emissions for more than half of the world's population. Therefore, there are a series of injustices that must be resolved. That is why it is urgent to open debates to seek political agreements and to achieve climate adaptation policies by climate and the energy crisis and also the water crisis. When we talk about this climate emergency, we are talking not only about death of people due to the heat waves and health problems, but also about the loss of crops. Therefore, a new food crisis that is being managed at this time. And we are also talking about impacts on infrastructures, urban infrastructures, energy infrastructures, transport infrastructures, energy, and all of this is going to have an impact on the economy and on the population as a whole. And as always, the climate energy emergency affects much more the working populations, the most vulnerable populations, to the most impoverished populations, both in the global north and in the south. In this sense, I think that we must also rescue your question. At this moment, there are a series of scientific contributions that should be made to us very a lot. Just like in the case of Ukraine, we should be very concerned that it could be a conflict between two nuclear powers, such as the US and Russia. In the case of science on climate change, we have seen, for example, a 2019 study that indicates that droughts are closely related because of the heat waves. We are seeing right now in Europe, but also in the case of India or Iran. So far, when there was a drought in a region of the world that produced cereals, a very basic, important good for food change, there was another region that compensated the crop losses with an increase of in global temperature, that we are already almost on this path of 15 degrees Celsius that is going to happen every 16 years. But rather, we are approaching a scenario of a global temperature rise of 2 degrees centigrade and up to more than 4 or 5 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. With 2 degrees centigrade increase global temperature, this is an area that droughts will occur in 5 major cereal production regions at the same time, will occur every 2 years, so that opens up new fronts, food crisis, and like you asked, what happens to the million of people who are climate refugees, because this is one of the great challenges of the future. We have here the European Union, the Spanish government promoting criminal policies, lethal necro policies, as we have seen recently on the border between Morocco and Ceuta in North Africa, which have at least 37 migrants from different sub-Saharan African countries have tried to enter Spain, and there is an entire migratory regime that with more than 500 million euros from the European Union, but also from Spain. What it does is increasing the militarization of the southern borders of the European Union, and that generates tens of thousands of victims among the migrant population. So from the social movements, we are committed to open the borders and welcoming all the people who are climate refugees, but also the refugees from the armed conflicts of the wars, and also from the poverty generated by the capitalism itself promoted by the European Union. What is worrying about all of this is that apparently this data is not going to stop decreasing. On the contrary, it seems that it could increase, and finally there will be a political will to reach a real and timely agreement. I want to thank you, Tom Kushars and Carlos Mendez, for having been with us. Let's mark the second pause in our critical move. In it, we share our strategic move within the invitation to follow us through our active Twitter accounts. The energy crisis in Europe, aggravated by sanctions against Russia. What impact will it have on the transition to other energy sources? Could climate change become a central element of geopolitical dispute rather than global cooperation? When we return, we will continue the analysis. How have some governments more than others implemented actions to counter the effects of climate change? Here we tell you. According to the European Environment Agency, the European Union is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, after China and the United States. The main responsibility lies with the energy sector, which accounts for 78% of these emissions. The so-called European Green Pact aims to consolidate the region as a climate-neutral zone by 2050. The countries of the subcontinent have responded unevenly, and not all have made the same commitments to address the harmful effects of climate change. Russia is one of the most committed. In 2015, it set itself the target of limiting the emission by 70% by 2030. At the general debate of the 75th session of the UN General Assembly, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the ambitious goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2060 or even earlier, framed in a transition to green, low-carbon development. Switzerland and Norway are also nations with ambitious environmental commitments. They say they will reduce emissions by 50 and 40% respectively. In contrast, the European Commission demanded in February 2017 that Spain, Italy, France, Germany and the United Kingdom strengthen air pollution control measures. According to the regional body, 70,000 people died prematurely from high levels of nitrogen dioxide in 2013, which is 3 times the number of people killed in road accidents. In response to the air pollution crisis, the European Union announced the investment of €8 million in a project coordinated by the Higher Council for Scientific Research to improve air quality assessment, called RE-Urbans. The WHO's Director of Public Health, Maria Neira, described the current COVID-19 pandemic scenario as a result of an erroneous model of relationship with the environment, with ecosystems and the aggressive deforestation that have managed the changed living conditions. She recalled that epidemics such as AIDS, Ebola, and Zika came from a leap from animal health to human health, and noted that the marketing of unprotected animal species in transit has contributed to the spread of infectious diseases. We continue the analysis. From Chile, we are joined by Patricio Rodrigo, Executive Director of Ambiente, also agronomist. Thanks for your time for TeleSUR. Welcome to this critical move. How are you? Thank you very much for inviting me, and greetings to the audience. Thank you, Patricio. Some specialists in the program in our first stage spoke to us about the need to waive a new agreement, an agreement that gathers not only the latter need, but that is born precisely from the basis of social movements that do not obtain linked interests, not only geopolitical but also strategic, regarding what has been handled within the Paris Agreement. Let's remember that the United States abruptly left the same and returned in the management of Joe Biden, but nothing has changed regarding its policy, and with it also the commitments of European countries that they are going to do practically unfulfilled in the face of the energy crisis that the entire old continent is going through. What geopolitical interpretation we can make about this, and in somehow counteracts this global warming, because the effect that we are going to suffer, we are going to pay absolutely all for this. Yeah, we are already paying for it. The deaths that have occurred in Spain and the rest of Europe, in Bangladesh, Pakistan, India. What happens is there is a problem of power. The countries, the governments, and the international agreements discussed the governance in the UN try to come to an agreement. They signed commitments. In fact, 50 years ago, half a century ago, the first meeting on environment and development was held in Stockholm in 1972. These very same problems were already known. 50 years have come to pass. and of meeting and the problems continue to get worse because there is a problem of power. The governments and the United Nations do not control power. The power is being managed in favor of interests, economic interests that are not interested in changing the development model and that they have imposed to the world. It was imposed on the world a model of development, North American, with the consumer society, where everyone under the slogan consumption, then I ceased. Well, and with that, a whole economic growth began. The excessive environment to the detriment of people's quality of life. People are already enslaved in consumption models with their debt, with their credit cards, full of anxiety. It has committed on, prevents the same because of his collective interest. People do not find peace of mind and live stress and afraid. They need a profound change of paradigm. We see nowadays the same economic problem. Now is taking place what we could say the tribe of a Greek philosopher that described that the conflict between an empire when an empire emerges over another as is possible, and sure they do not seek land. All is happening. It is nuclear. In front of China, that stands up as economic monsters, and that is invading its backyard in Latin America, its backyard in Europe, because we see that Europe is aligned itself with this perverse policy of the United States to enter the Ukrainian war and continue promoting the economic concentration policy of an axis that wants to advance and maintain a unipolar world when the world will no longer be unipolar. The globalization is over, as many specialists have said. We live in a world multipolar, and in that sense countries like Latin America have the obligation to organize and have a common pole against the rest of the world that is also organized. In the pole of Europe, the US, the pole of Russia, Iran, China. Then what happens with Latin America? We are going to continue being natural resources as with blind development that is leading us to the extinction of the planet's civilizations. We already need to incorporate a profound change, and that must start at two levels. The United Nations has to continue below to incorporate a third element in climate change. I agree. The transformation is not enough to mitigate the greenhouse effect. It is not enough to adapt to the drought, the floods. So we have to transform a wrong development model to a new development model that is a more ecological society, a sustainable society. The development objectives are to think about the powers in actions, thing that we are not doing. Patricia, they say that every crisis generates a way out or has a way out alternative, but it's also based on the interests. You believe that a technological alternative to try to alleviate climate change could be nuclear energy? I ask you, it will be an interesting alternative, and above all, what could unleash within geostrategic interests? This could perhaps be another conflict of interest between countries, and some nations have raised it, as the case of France, for example. Well, France entered with the nuclear energy. They depend on that. Their companies depend on that. In Chile, they try to get here with the technology of nuclear technology, but my country said no. The society organized itself, the youth organized, and they say, we don't want you here in Chile because we have geothermic, so go with your business elsewhere. Nuclear powers, as we know it, is in fusion nuclear power, where we break the plutonium, so we generate the energy. It becomes obsolete and banal, and because it is already a fusion energy, where from the hydrogen we give the helium, and still is very expensive. So let's consume less energy and adapt ourselves to the energy that we have in the nearby territories. Let's go to the local territories with lower development that protects us, where we have the water and the food against the climate change phenomenon. It is going to keep on growing. This phenomena, we cannot stop it. We are not going to stop it because we will have to stop the world as the things are doing. So we have to protect our communities and our territories from the local and look for the energies. And of course they are there, but they're just not developed. Nowadays, we see that Europe is desperate to go back to the nuclear energy, and also with the coal, and with the conflict in Ukraine. But it also implies a strong restriction in policy. Nowadays, we are doing the things wrong. We are not sustainable. The world is going to the destruction of the human being. The planet will continue insisting for millions of the human civilization of the planet. Our own mistakes, we have caused an imbalance. And the big question is on whose hands we are. Thank you very much, Patricio, for having been with us. Thank you for your time. Thank you. This is the end of the broadcast. We close our geopolitical board. I'm Paula Perez. Stay tuned.
The story goes, you're gonna make it if you try, and if you don't, may your life waste away, 'cause it's your fault. Like the sheen of a rotting fish, the glitter just dazzles. For everyone who's filthy rich, a million must suffer.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, access and analysis of political, economic, and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The world today. Mondays on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
Good evening and welcome to the world today. My guest in the studio is Professor Adolph Reed, who teaches political science at UPenn, the University of Pennsylvania in the United States of America. He is an author, a powerful essayist, and has now for many years been writing about Black history, real Black history that is, and the development and weaknesses of the African American political movements over the last 3 decades at least, and much longer. In recent years, Professor Reed has produced some incredibly powerful critiques of the way in which identity politics is being used, both by the mainstream media and, of course, by those who believe in it and campaign exclusively on that basis. This is not a view that we've interrogated at great length on this program, but tonight, with Professor Reed, we have an opportunity to do so. Adolph Reed, welcome to the world today. Let's start by discussing the decline, if you like, the political decline of that amazing uprising of Black Americans that took place in the 60s and the 70s. What were the causes of the decline, and what led to it happening in the way it did?
Interesting. Well, there's a lot there. In speaking about the decline, just to openers, I'll say the answer to that question is rather similar to the answer to the question what happened to the anti-colonial movements in the 1960s. But the problem was that the conventional understanding, for instance, is that the emergence of Black Power, and I came out of the Black Power movement as a youth, certainly, was what was a radically insurgent politics that was of a piece with, or at least something like a point on the same curve as the anti-colonial insurgencies and uprisings in the 50s and 60s. And in the book, I focus on 2 particular moments when the challenge to capitalist rule came closest to bubbling up to the surface in American politics. Moments when class became or threatened to become a general framework for understanding the character of inequality in the U.S. The two I examine are the 5 to 8 years after World War II and the mid-1960s. And one of the tropes of my argument is that in each of those instances, left insurgents or left insurgencies were defeated, right? Which is not really the big news. Everyone knows they were, and of course we lose more often than we win. I've often said to students who want to pursue left politics that you need to think like an American League baseball player, that if you're successful 3 times out of 10, you go for the Hall of Fame. But in the period after World War II, where the capitalist classes in Europe came out of World War II weak and discredited from their association with fascism, the bourgeois class in the U.S. came out stronger than ever and ironically sanitized by the role that they played in the war. So they beat us. What we got instead was the collective bargaining regime and the system of employer-provided benefits, the tremendous growth of private home ownership that was ultimately subsidy from the federal government to the construction industry and realtors. In the middle 60s, there was a similar moment with the discovery of poverty as a special condition, and a movement further in liberal intellectual society and the policymaking world further to discredit racism, right, or racial injustice. The punchline is black power emerged out of a moment at which it seemed that it was clear to many people that the objectives of the civil rights movement had been won and weren't fully adequate.
Did the Black Panthers, I mean, they were one of the more interesting groups, at one stage even considering creating a larger party with white radicals. And that seemed in some ways to be one of the more thoughtful and creative groups that arose in that period.
Yes, that's what I came out of. I mean, not the Panthers per se, but like that was my formative politics. Right. In fact, like I discovered you, like in the New Revolutionaries, right, like in '68. But I mean, here's the problem, right? Just as one gets older, it seems the fruit tasted better in one's youth, though it may have. The more that moment, with the Panthers in particular, seems to feel like a path tragically not taken, right? But here's the problem. And I mean, there's another conversation to have here about like a strain of historical scholarship that I think is wrong and problematic on epistemic and interpretivist grounds, but that's probably another story. But the problem is that the radicals, and I say this as having been one of them, that the radicals never really had purchase of more than a toenail, right, and a fractured toenail at that, of influence in actually existing black politics. But as more and more of the radicals began to see the limitations of black power as an ideology, right, and a program, they began to undergo periods of ideological development or purification, right? But the problem was not so much how those positions differed, although we fought it out among ourselves, certainly. But the biggest problem was what they shared. And what they shared was an approach to understanding politics that did have more to do with a religion and a religious faith than it did with direct, sort of hard-headed analysis of the world as we saw it and the changes that were actually taking place in really existing black politics, right? And understanding that the project of movement building combined proselytizing, like a street corner preacher, right, to win adherents and waiting for the moment, right, the crash, the apocalypse, whatever, right? The millenarian moment when the revolution comes, right? Even, songs of the era when the revolution comes.
It's no surprise that quite a lot of these people ended up in the Democratic Party.
Right.
Ended up, getting, like Jesse Jackson, the best known amongst them, setting up the Rainbow Coalition. The minute the coalition collapses, or he doesn't take it further, or doesn't want it to be outside the Democrats, he basically, Manning Marable said this to me in so many words, effectively does a deal with the Democratic Party machine, who pay off all his debts, and in return he becomes a loyal supporter of any leader.
Right.
So it's a sad business, and this has now become institutionalized.
Right. No, absolutely. And look, the thing that always just blew me away about the Jackson phenomenon was that there was never any doubt about what Jesse Jackson was, right? He would never have been part of organizing a genuinely left or broad political coalition, because his sole political commitment has always been the advancement of Jesse Jackson.
Yeah.
And as early as 1970, he had said he said actually that he wanted to be recognized as a new Booker T. Washington, basically, after about a year or two after King's death, which was a role that hadn't really existed, right? But so there's that. And a problem that we've had consistently, right, and I think us Altakakers have our own versions of it that are especially bad, is that not wanting to face up to the limitations of our power and influence as a left, and a kind of wishful thinking, right? I've described it sometimes as the myth of the spark, right? That some event, some personality is going to come along and presto, right? Things will happen, things will fall into place. And people tend to sacralize the insurgencies of the 1960s so much now that there's that we don't engage in the kind of critical examination that we should as militants. And this is probably like an old man's rant, right? Also, but increasingly to me, right, one of the key fault lines in sort of left of center politics is that which separates what I consider dilettantes from people I consider militants, right? And politics isn't about feeling good about yourself. Politics isn't about trying to find, an appealing history that you can hold on to in the dark night, right? People, and there may be a bit of a generational thing about this. I think people like from our era are not surprised at all about the possibility that the military is going to take power in Brazil. And we're not surprised at all, to be honest, that at the slightly less infelicitous reality that the PSUV's connections to the military are probably the only reason that they haven't been taken down in Venezuela.
The other point which you've often made in your essays, Adolf, is that if it wants to be, effectively, this is what you've said, but correct me if I'm wrong, that capitalism can be, if it wants to be, gender blind and race blind. It doesn't need any of that for its functioning. It doesn't need discrimination against women, or against black people, or against gay people, or against anyone else. It's not capitalism that does that. In other words, these problems and discriminations can be perfectly well solved within the system. One example of this, for instance, is if you look at how gay people were treated historically over the centuries. I mean, homosexuality was illegal till the mid-60s in most parts of the Western Christian world. And today, if anyone opposes gay marriages, everyone screams at them saying, so all this can be changed without affecting how the system functions in terms of what its real needs are.
Right. No, absolutely. No, I couldn't have put it more sharply myself. And the extent therefore to which the sole actionable form of inequality that exists in either bourgeois practice or left discourse, ironically, now is disparity, right? Racial disparity, gender disparity, or whatever. Then that is at best, right, the sort of left wing, the sort of critical left self-consciousness of neoliberalism. But it's a metric of injustice that depends upon and exists entirely within the bourgeois framework. Again, as my friend Walter Michaels has put it pretty eloquently over and over again, and I quote him a lot on this, that if the ideal, the substantive ideal, right, of that perspective of social justice is that a society in which 1% of the population controls 90% of the stuff that there is to control, can be just, providing that in the U.S., 12% of the 1% are black, 14% are Latino, there's half women, and whatever the appropriate percentage of gays and lesbians would be. It's probably a myth, but there's a story I've heard for a long time that when the Cubans came to power in the 60s, they took the philosophers out of the University of Havana and elsewhere and trained them as artificial inseminators for the cattle production effort. And I say if it's not true, it should be.
Well, the other big example, of course, is that you can get trapped. Obviously, you would agree that we defend people against all oppressions, goes without saying. That's not at issue. But the sort of movements that grew up during the Obama campaign didn't last long. The only reason they grew up is he was a pretty effective speaker, though what he said was usually quite vapid. But he was a person of color. And having a person of color in the White House, people thought on its own would change things.
Right. No, I know. It was extraordinary to watch, right? It definitely was. I've often said that it can be more important to be in the right place at the right time and pay attention than to be smart or perceptive. And I just happened to live in that state Senate district that Obama came out of when he was emerging. So I got to see...
This is Chicago, in Chicago.
Yeah. I was in the birthing room, basically, and was close to his predecessor in his seat and was part of the negotiations about his replacement of her and the like. And it was just fascinating because, in fact, I even made a reference to it in a Village Voice article, a column that I wrote at the beginning of 1996, and I didn't mention his name because nobody would have known him because he was nobody. But he was so obviously an Ivy League financial sector foundation world confection with nothing there.
That was obvious even then.
Yeah, no, right. It clearly, right? And so from that perspective, it was interesting to watch his invention. And I've often pointed out to people that in 2008, Obama got more Wall Street money than any other candidate. And they often enough look sheepish because they don't want to, because they know what the implications are, but they don't want to face up to them, right? And you remember, of course, that when he met with the Wall Street investment bankers after the crash,
they were amazed.
And he said to them, I'm all that stands between you and the pitchforks, right? And if we want to understand why Trump is in the White House now, that story and stories like that and Obama's identitarianism are as much a part of the story as anything else is.
No, well, I mean, the big talk at the time he was in the White House for 8 years was that we now live in a post-racial society. Right. And that so-called post-racial society, then it elects a white supremacist as president of the United States. I mean,
and part of the thing too is like the post-racialism thing. There was like no social issue, no political matter, right? No class contradiction, no social danger that academics cannot turn into raw material for their own career advancement. And it's and it's really, man, I tell you, I've been at this a long time, granted, but it just seems to get worse and worse. So the whole post-racialism thing, I mean, this is a debate that has come around like in different guises since the first waves of black elected officials started to get elected in the 70s. And when you stop and ask yourself, well, I mean, what the hell could that even possibly mean, right? So now we have the emergence of a vapid autodidact like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who sort of trades on this empty debate, and is like, and it seems to me that he speaks both to, you know, that strain of the people of color, the professional managerial class, for whom racial affront or racial identity is a form of capital, basically, and it is like in a lot of industries, as well as for those white liberals, ironically, who want to feel good about themselves for feeling bad about how bad things are in the world. The punchline is that there's no way to counter it, right? I mean, there's nothing to do except to feel bad and maybe utter Protestant moments of public confession, and then go on about your business. And, you know.
But Adolf, even you, sort of ultra-critical of many of the things going on, did get quite enthused by the campaign that Bernie Sanders waged against the Democratic Party machine. I mean, we were here watching these huge rallies, mixed rallies. Even when Bernie didn't speak, someone else spoke. She was brilliant. I mean, it's a real moment, I think, in recent American history where you feel something bubbling up.
Yep. No, I agree. And I mean, I worked in the campaign until the end, actually. And around the country, so I got to see a lot of it. I worked a lot in South Carolina, you know, for instance. But yeah, no, that's right. And there's something there. And I think that the big thing now should be, right, the debate for you know, between left and right that overlaps the Democratic Party boundaries going forward. A friend of mine just sent me today a resolution that the International Longshore Workers Union just passed as an international to reach out to the 5 other unions that endorsed Bernie to begin you know, discussions now about creating something else, right? And I understand the resolution was modified, which has to happen, but it makes a reference to the 8 unions that came together to form the CIO in the mid-1930s. And I mean, this is something that, you know, those of us in and around the labor movement have been trying to work on for decades now. And, you know, this looks hopeful. I mean, it's interesting to see, for instance, how the Wall Street wing of the Democratic Party and the identitarian wing of the Democratic Party are coming together now. And this has been clear since before the election, to form a bloc that, among other things, is red baiting constantly, right? I mean, I was struck to see how many of them have projected like the following logic: Sanders stands for economic redistribution and calls for identification with the interests of the working class. Trump calls for catering to the concerns of the white working class. Therefore, Sanders is the same thing as Trump, but even beyond Sanders, therefore calling for economic redistribution is by definition a cover for racism. So, but it's good to know who the enemies are, right? I mean, and how people line up.
And Trump, of course, made a mockery of everything he'd said on this question within weeks. I mean, the big thing was that I'm going to clear the swamp of Wall Street. And the swamp moved into the White House. And on many other issues as well, you know, just shameless. Yeah. The tax cuts for the rich. So I think his time is, you know, hopefully up if there is a candidate who can take him on. Now, do you think Bernie is going to try and get the nomination for the next time?
Right now, I think so.
You think he will?
Yeah. Well, I think he's going to try, yeah. And I think the other side is already trying to organize against him. But I really think that the most important work is going to be done at the state level between now and a year from now. Right, and I mean that's where either old coalitions need to be broadened, and or new ones need to be developed, because, as my old friend and comrade Anthony Mazzocchi said often, neither Democrats nor Republicans have anything credible to offer working people of whatever genders, sexual orientations, or races and ethnicities, who are becoming more and more precarious, who are suffering more and more. And in the absence of their having anything to offer, then that's a space, he always said, could be filled by forces with with a much nastier analyses and programs. And that's kind of where we are now. I don't think that winning back committed Trump supporters is a profitable undertaking. But there were between 6.5 and over 9 million people who voted for Trump, who had also voted for Sanders and voted for Obama at least once. Yeah. And you've got to assume
this is
that
in the Rust Belt, mainly.
Right. No, that's right, exactly. And you've got to assume that a lot of those people voted for something they thought they were going to get, which is not the thing that they got. And I think that's that's a crucial population for us to speak to. And I don't mean target like in the way the pollsters target. I mean to craft a political economic agenda that addresses them, because what both the left identitarians, and I'll toss the Black Lives Matter people in there too, want us all to forget that blacks are disproportionately working class also, and Latinos are disproportionately working class, and women are disproportionately working class, and gays and lesbians are disproportionately in the working class. And I think that's where our focus has to be.
Understood. Last question.
Thank you very much for having me, by the way.
No, it's a great pleasure. Do you think it's possible that Trump could be elected again, despite?
Yeah, I do.
You do?
Yeah, I do. Yep, I do. I mean, a lot of it has to do with what the Democrats do and don't do. A lot of it has to do with other things that break over the next couple of years. I watched a couple of minutes of CBS Morning News today, and I saw a reporter talking to a soybean farmer in Illinois about who's a Trump supporter, Trump voter, and he's still a Trump supporter. And he acknowledged that farmers, the big generic, are taking it on the chin now, right, because of the tariff war. But he nonetheless supports Trump even before the $12 billion bailout, because he thinks it's going to pay off in the long run. But the point is, though, that the offering of empty hope right, about payoffs coming down the road, and the classic fascist impulse of deflecting every criticism by turning it by the combination of the big lie and scapegoating. And by the way, this guy and his whole administration fit the profile of a fascist agitator with uncomfortable truth. But I think it's possible, like, for him to play this out, until after November. And I think that's partly because the liberals are looking in the wrong places for trying to challenge him, right? And that's, again, because they are just as committed to defeating the emergence of a political, economically grounded left as the right wing are. And I think it's more and more important for our side to take that into account too. But yeah, I think it's entirely possible he could win again.
Adolf Reed, great pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much.
Oh, it's all mine. Thank you very much, Tariq. And I trust at some point we'll be able to do it in person.
I hope so.
Argentina's Vice President Cristina Fernandez has questioned the legitimacy and impartiality of the Supreme Court, accusing the judicial body of breaking laws to favor former President Mauricio Macri. At least 13 people were killed and other 2 injured in clashes between inmates of prison in the city of Santo Domingo in north-central Ecuador. Moscow and Tehran confirmed that their respective national oil companies have signed an historic cooperation memorandum, while Europe is experiencing the worst energy crisis in the history. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Ana Marrero from the TeleSUR headquarters in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. Argentina's Vice President Cristina Fernandez has questioned the legitimacy and impartiality of the Supreme Court, accusing the judicial body of breaking laws to favor former President Mauricio Macri. The Vice President said that the judiciary has become a political party that persecutes the forces that oppose it and leaves citizens basically on probation. Cristina Fernandez shared an audiovisual document on her social media featuring a relating to the lies about how justice worked at the nation's highest court. Fernandez also said that the sentence against her on the Alida trial is already written and signed, and that she has been subjected to the bias. In the audiovisual document shared by the Vice President Fernandez, she says that Macri's decision opened the way for a process of political, judicial, and media persecutions that has been unleashed throughout Latin America. This Monday in Argentina, Delia Giovanola, 96-year-old, one of the founders members of the Plaza de Mayo Grandmother Association, has passed away. The association has bid farewells with great sadness to the person that they describe as a militant of memory, truth, justice, and joy. A beloved grandmother, Delia Giovanola, after almost 4 years of struggle, was able to locate and meet her grandson Martin in 2015. Argentine President Alberto Fernandez praised Giovanola and said that a tireless woman will remain as an outstanding example for generations to come. In Panama, the three organizations that coordinate the protests against the high cost of living and corruption in the country have decided to unite, and they want to clearly state that it was the executive that withdrew from the dialogue table. The Alliance for the Peoples and the Alliance Native Peoples and the National Alliance for the Rights of the Organized People will hold a meeting this Tuesday to reach a consensus on what issue will be discussed with the government. In addition to the demands already made to the executive, like lower prices for fuel, the basic good basket, and medicines, now they have included the fight against corruption. Luis Arturo Sanchez, a member of the Teachers Union and a spokesman for ANADEPO, said that they reject the basis mediation of the Outmen's office and that their stand reflects to the interests of the Panamanian people.
A message to the whole country, especially to the government, that with its dirty tactics wants to destroy the national popular movement. We have had this first encounter to confirm a single united front, that we are a single popular force, which is what the whole country wanted.
Regarding the version expressed by several media and government representatives, the indigenous leaders of the dialogue table at San Felix denounced the kidnapping of the right to freedom of expression. They ratified that it was the Panamanian executive the first to leave the table.
In the versions spread by several media and government representatives, the indigenous leader of the dialogue table at San Felix denounced the kidnapping of their right to freedom of expression. They ratified that it was the Panamanian executive the first to leave the table. We have shown our total disposition, our best behavior, our willingness to work for the common good, but the government has left the table. So, for the moment, we have also left the table.
The Nicaraguan people held vigils throughout the country to celebrate the 33rd anniversary of the 1979 revolution against dictator Anastasio Somoza. Nicaraguans took to the streets waving flags of the Sandinista National Liberation Front and honored those who gave their lives from their homeland 3 years ago. Earlier, the monarchies started in Managua and other cities in the country, showing people support and affection for the revolution, the National Front, and the government of President Daniel Ortega. Heads of governments, progressive leaders, and representatives of the political, social, and indigenous organizations around Nicaragua to join in the celebration. With 95 confirmed cases, Peru became the South American country with the highest number of monkeypox cases confirmed per million inhabitants. According to data from the World Health Organization and Peru National Center for Epidemiology, Disease Prevention and Control, the nation showed 1.46 cases per million citizens, a higher rate than even Brazil, the country with the highest numbers of people infected in South America. Numbers published by the Peruvian Ministry of Health register that the disease is present in 8 of the 25 departments in the country, and the highest numbers are found in 5 districts of the metropolitan: Lima, Surco, Jesús María, Pueblo Libre, Cercado de Lima, and San Martín de Porres. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, accesses analysis of political, economic, and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The World Today. Mondays on TeleSUR. It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. At least 13 people were killed and others 2 injured in clashes between inmates in the prison in the city of Santo Domingo in north-central Ecuador. The National Police, the Armed Forces, and the Ministry of Public Health were called to the emergency. Later on, the National Service for Comprehensive Care of Adults deprived of their liberty and adolescent offenders said it had recovered control in the prison known as Bella Vista. The same prison was hit by violence in May 9, resulting in the death of 40 inmates. The Ecuadorian prison system has been affected with a serious crisis due to confrontations between rival drug trafficking gangs. In 2021, the country saw a wave of prison riots that left more than 300 inmates dead. The United Nations Human Rights Office expressed concern about rising violence around Haiti's capital, saying 99 people have been killed in recent fightings between rival gangs in the city's Solil district, Alan. The warning came hours after the UN Security Council unanimously approved a resolution renewing the mandate of the UN office in the turbulent Caribbean nation and called on all countries to stop the transfer of small arms like weapons and ammunition to anyone that supporting gangs violence and criminal activity. According to data reported by the UN Humanitarian Affairs Coordination Office in Haiti, documented from January to the end of June, more than 900 killings, nearly 700 injured, and some numbers of kidnapping across the capital. UN spokesperson urged the authorities in Haiti to ensure fundamental rights are protected and placed at the front and center of their responses to the crisis. Two earthquakes hit Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Balakan provinces, injuring at least 10 people. According to authorities, the eastern Pakistan province's Gayan district, which was severely devastated by the 6.1 magnitude quadrant on June 22, was struck again by a quake. The provincial governor office said several residences were damaged and teams had been rushed to the scene to rescue people. The earthquake had a magnitude of 5.1 and was centered at a depth of 10 kilometers in the coast province. The second quake struck the northeastern province of Marrakech with a magnitude of 4.3, and its epicenter was in the province's Germ district. European government representatives met in Berlin, Germany, to analyze the emergency climate situation in the region. More than 1,000 people have died in Europe due to the current heat wave. The south of Europe is experiencing a heat wave with record temperatures already exceeding 40 degrees Celsius. The entry of warm air mass from the Sahara, which has already hit France and the United Kingdom, will cause several cities to experience unprecedented high temperatures. To make matters worse, there is the constant threat of wildfires, like it's recently been the case in Portugal, France, and Spain. The heat wave is also affecting countries such as Belgium, Italy, Greece, and Turkey. The respective governments are trying to reinforce security measures and emergency services. The United Kingdom on Tuesday recorded its hottest ever temperature reading, with the mercury rising to 39.1 degrees Celsius in the southern town of Charlotte, according to the Met Office Weather Service. The record-breaking data followed the country warmest every night, with temperatures in some regions remaining above 25 degrees Celsius. The UK's previous all-time record high of 38.7 Celsius was set in 2019. Tuesday's record will be broken again as the day goes on, with temperatures expected to continue rising. British officials issued that UK first ever extreme heat emergency, extending from London in the south to Manchester and Leeds to the north. Train services were disrupted by the rails, and more travel disruptions were expected. Belgium's Paradise Zoo, located in Wallonia in the province of Hainaut, puts special measures in place to protect animals and visitors from the heat. The animals are given frozen food, fruits suspended in water, and extra showers to alleviate the impact of extreme high temperatures on them. Also, the visitors can use fresh meats that helps them to tour the facilities without suffocating. Big state-run museums, primarily in Brussels, took the unusual step of offering free access on Tuesday to people over 65 to help them stay cool. Experts blame climate change for the latest heat wave and noted that more frequent extreme weather will only worsen in years to come. The heat wave is taken to engulf part of Europe in recent weeks has contributed to deadly wildfires in France, Greece, Portugal, and Spain, destroying a vast tracts of land. In our related news, the 11th meeting of Environment Ministers of Ibero-America has kicked off in the Dominican Republic. On its first day, there was one common demand: more action and more resources are needed to mitigate the current serious climate crisis. Representatives of the Ibero-American countries, along with representatives of international organizations such as the United Nations, have agreed that the current climate situation is unprecedented. At the meeting, they acknowledged that governments are obligated to send political signals and guarantee transparency and long-term and political certainty in the management of the current situation. The American Caribbean Regional Climate Change Coordinator for the United Nations Environment Program, Gustavo Mañez, said that the current climate crisis is huge and that it requires finances. Along the same lines, Andrea Mesa, Secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat their certification, described the situation as a planetary crisis. We have more news coming up after this final short break, so don't go away.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR. It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
Welcome back. On Monday, Moscow and Tehran confirmed that their respective national oil companies have signed an historic cooperation memorandum. The energy giants reached this agreement while Europe is experiencing the worst crisis in its history, and part of the world is affected by the effects of Brussels' decisions. Iranian National Oil Company and Russian energy giant Gazprom signed this Tuesday a memorandum of cooperation. Once the agreement was made public, Moish Konsaherm, the executive director of the Iranian oil company, said that it is the largest foreign investment in the history of the Iranian oil industry, and that it is expected to bring millions of dollars from the development of gas and oil fields. The details and the scope of the agreement will be announced in the coming hours. Russian President Vladimir Putin arrived in Tehran on Tuesday to attend a trilateral meeting summit with the leaders of Iran and Turkey. This is the first official visit of the Russian head of state since the beginning of the special military operation in Ukraine. Before the trilateral meeting, Putin met separately with Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev. The 6-year conflict in Syria, Iran's nuclear energy program, and economic cooperation between Moscow and Tehran respected the top agenda of the summit. Tehran brought together Russia and Turkey and Iran heads of state as the leaders of the sponsor countries of the ASEAN process, which was initiated in 2017 for peace in Syria. The International Organization for Migration confirmed that 193 asylum seekers were returned to Libya after being rescued off of coast last week. In a statement, the international organization reported that more than 10,000 people have been rescued and returned to Libya so far in 2022, including more than 600 women and 400 children. The IMF also added that nearly 200 people died and more than 600 others went missing on the central Mediterranean road in 2022. Libya has been suffering insecurity and chaos for many years, making a North African country up for a point of departure for people who want to cross the Mediterranean Sea to European shores. TeleSUR English continues to grow. The signal now reaches Europe, and you can order it from your cable dealer or tuner yourself. These parameters that you see on the screen are in place since July 1st, and quite for changes will be implemented for the signal in the Middle East and Africa. Now more than ever, the world connects to us, and our stories are being heard all around the globe. This news multi-platform will continue providing trustful content to oppose the Yemeni's media's narrative and our faithfulness to our audience. And with that story, we have come to the end of this news brief, but before our farewell, we would like to introduce a song written by Paulo Gomes, and a farmer who lives near the city where Brazil's former president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was born. Remember that you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net, and you can also join us on our socials. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram as well. For TeleSUR English, I'm from the South, I'm Ana Marrero, and thank you for watching.
Essa letra eu escrevi hoje para o nosso herói, o Lula brasileiro. Essa música aqui, essa letra, ela não vem denigrir a imagem de ninguém. Que você preste atenção. Quero viver minha vida em paz, sem ter com que me preocupar. Se você fosse preocupar com tudo que se passa no Brasil, você vai acabar louco no asilo. Porque ninguém liga pra ninguém, é trabalhador, sendo refém, é vereador, roubando deputado, é corrupção pra todo lado. Lula dá um jeito no nosso Brasil, Lula dá um jeito no nosso Brasil.
Un canto por la América Unida. Mira, que lo escuchan allá arriba. ¡Vamos! Somos la tierra, somos la arcilla, la esperanza que brota y germina. 500 años nos han pisoteado, aquí seguimos, de aquí no nos vamos. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta, un pueblo unido que no calla.
tierra somos gigantes, nadie se rinde, vamos para arriba, esta tierra es tuya y también es mía. Pueblo mestizo, guerrero y solidario, aquí nadie es extraño, aquí somos hermanos. Todos los países digan presente, Venezuela y Cuba presente, Nicaragua, Honduras presente, el Caribe entero. América, América, se levanta, un pueblo unido que no calla, no se detiene. América, 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 se levanta, un pueblo unido que no calla.
Soy Chupacatari, soy hueca impuro, 5 siglos resistiendo el atropello y el abuso. El Avia Yala reflorece junto al alba, sin un solo continente porque rayos nos separa. Con Sucre y Bolívar seguimos pa'lante, pa' encima latino, no hay visa que nos pare.
Desde la Patagonia hasta el Río Bravo, los latinos levantamos la mano. América, América, lindísima, gente se levanta, un pueblo unido que no calla. América, lindísima, gente se levanta, un pueblo unido que no calla. México y Bolivia, presente. Puerto Rico libre, presente. Todo el continente, presente. Latino.
Who's moving the chess man? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR. Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, access and analysis of political, economic, and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The World Today. Mondays on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
El mundo se mueve constantemente y todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos. Se mueve la geopolítica mundial. Nos preguntamos qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento, cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan. Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
Welcome to the Healthy News of TeleSUR. I like to accompany you. I'm Janani Flores, ready to inform you. We know that nowadays children are also adults consume a lot of sweets. That's when the problem and intestinal parasites begin to arrive. That is why there will be our central theme this week. But first, we review what's happening in the recent days in terms of health.
In Peru, sanitary graduates fumigated in Lima, the capital, the gigantic cemetery of Nueva Esperanza, considered the largest in all of South America with 60 hectares of vegetation. The work was aimed at eradicating the mosquito that transmits dengue, in an attempt to control a new outbreak of this endemic disease in Peru, which has killed about 30 people this year. Due to the large size of this place, the breeding grounds of larvae and mosquitoes in the water reach a large part of the population.
The appearance of cases that are beginning has to lead us to take immediate action, so the Directors LimaSur taking preventive actions before this begins, to increase begins to tackle the potential breeding grounds of Aedes aegypti. This intervention will also be carried out in other places where cases are reported.
Reported cases of dengue exceed 26,000 nationwide this year, and authorities are conducting a campaign to raise awareness of the importance of not leaving water in the vats of the grapes.
I thought it was like any harmless mosquito and it was going around. We wanted to kill him, but we couldn't, and the next day it stayed, and the morning I see my vase of flowers and see that they move like little fish. I thought it was little fish, and there were like millions of mosquitoes.
The New Hope of Virgin Cemetery of Lourdes was opened in 1961. According to municipality of Villa María del Triunfo, it receives 2 million visitors a year, so it's crucial to maintain epidemiological controls in place. The National Library of Medicine of the United States released several symptoms of depression, among which are irritable or low mood most of the time, difficulty falling asleep or excessive sleep, large change in appetite, often with weight gain or loss, decreased pleasure in activities that usually make you happy, inactivity and withdrawal from usual activities, feelings of hopelessness or abandonment. Depression is often passed down through families, and this may be due to genes, learned behaviors at the home, or in your environment. It can also be triggered by a stressful, unhappy event in life, although often it is a combination of these factors. Therefore, if a person suffers from severe depression, they may need a hospital stay or participate in a patient treatment program until the symptoms improve, which is why it is important to consult a health expert to attend to these types of situations that compromise our mental and body stability. A new study published in the journal Cancer Causes and Control links high fish consumption with an increased risk of malignant melanoma. Melanoma is the deadliest type of skin cancer with few forms of prevention. Researchers at Brown University in the United States analyzed the diet and health of nearly 500,000 Americans and calculated the incidence of malignant melanomas that developed over an average period of 15 years using data obtained from cancer registries. Among them, they identified approximately 5,000 cases. In 2011, another study already suggested that melanoma was the only type of tumor that could be associated with a higher intake of fish. Now, this expanded monitoring has allowed to consolidate the data on this relationship. Meanwhile, the consumption of this product has not stopped growing. Given the considerable limitations of the research, the authors suggest that further research will be necessary in order to truly attribute a relationship to fish intake with melanoma risk. Currently, nutritionists do not recommend any changes to advice on fish consumption.
Which are the health important dates? Let's go know them.
Health important dates. The 27th of June, World Microbiome Day. It commemorates the importance of microbes in preserving the health of human beings. Overuse and misuse of antibiotics can cause bacteria to become resistant to antibiotics, making them ineffective. Every 27th of June, the International Day of Deafblind is commemorated, a unique condition where the person presents a total or partial limitation of the senses of distance, vision, and hearing. The commemoration responds to the declaration of their basic needs. The 3rd of July, World Day of Broad Thumb Syndrome, a rare pathology that affects 1 in 150,000 births. It is a rare disease, usually caused by a genetic mutation. It is characterized by thick thumbs and toes, short stature, particular facial features, and varying degrees of intellectual disability.
We continue with the healthy news of TeleSUR. When was the last time you dewormed? It is something that is recommended to do every 6 months because these microorganisms advance and grow uncontrollably. They can even reach our brain. It is common to feel healthy person but actually be full of parasites since they usually do not cause obvious symptoms. In this issue, we will reveal how we can effectively deworm ourselves to prevent those organisms from taking away our nutrients and life slowly.
Parasites are microorganisms that live inside living beings to be able to feed on these. Intestinal parasites are lodged within the intestines and have the ability to reproduce, causing discomfort and infection in those who suffer from it.
There are intestinal worms. Many times they attack us, but many times they attack our children. So it is important that we know that there may be infections of intestinal worms, and what solutions are there for it. That if this happens chronically, it will generate chronic problems in your health. In many cases, I have patients who have chronic diseases, but that everything can be explained by parasites. They are tested and turn out negative. Many studies are done and turn out negative.
Many people unknowingly suffer from parasitic infections that can be a contributing factor to constant chronic health problems.
Many times you have a child who sleeps well and at the moment begins not to sleep well, begins to wake up, go to bed at night, or so on. Suspect about it. If it changes the sleep suspect intestinal worms, what you have to do is for one to get very observant, observe the area of the anus, that is where they go out at night, because they go out. And if you see little things coming out of there moving, little ones, you already know that the child is infected with intestinal worms, and it's something that can be resolved.
Among the most common symptoms and signs in a patient with intestinal parasites are digestive problems, constipation, diarrhea, or persistent gas.